colleagues and guests. The apologies I've received is from Mr. Kwankwa, who will not be able to join us in the meeting today, and the minister. However, the Transnet is led by the chairperson of the board. Thank you, Chair.
If I hear you, you said the minister also have an apology?
Yes, Chairperson.
Okay, there's no one from the ministry.
The Director General is here, Chair.
Okay, I was asking deliberately, there is no one from the ministry. The Director General is here, okay. Then we will have to ask the Director General to do an opening or an overview before we give to Transnet.
Good morning, Chair, and good morning to honorable members, to the Chair of Transnet, as well as the executive team. Chair, let me also relay the apology of the Deputy Minister, who's also in the cabinet meeting this morning. We're having two submissions being tabled there. It required both the principals. So if I can just
sorry, my apology. Did you? Can I appeal to all members, when you are not provided with any opportunity to speak, to mute your gadget? It's important for all members to continue monitoring their gadget. Sometimes you don't have to press it deliberately to speak. You might hit it by mistake and it unmute, and it will expose the conversation and what behind this camera. Please, all of us and the people who are partaking in this portfolio committee, if you are not speaking, look carefully at your gadget and you remain muted. Thank you. Over to you, Honorable, Mr. DG.
No, thank you so much, Chair. Chair, we are here to present Transnet annual results, which presentation will be led by the board and executive team of Transnet. Chair, it was a difficult year, as it will be seen when the figures are shared with the committee. Transnet is very much exposed to the economic cycle. And as we know, with the impact of the pandemic and some of the challenges that we have had with regard to safety of our infrastructure, that would have had a direct impact on the performance of the business. And the team at Transnet has also had to contend with the historical malfeasance in the business, and we'll see as they share the figures with regard to irregular expenditure. It's unfortunately, these figures tend to have impact on the performance in the year we are reporting against, by virtue of how the irregular expenditure framework has been defines how the reporting should be done. It's an area that we need to look at closely, so that, so to speak, the burden of the past does not drag down the current performance of the team that we have in place there. But with all those challenges, we believe that a good baseline has been set for better performance going forward. And the team will also share some of the repositioning strategies that they are undertaking to show up the business. Thank you so much, Chair. We'll hand over to the Transnet team led by the chairperson, if that is okay with you, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, before DG, we give that opportunity to the chair of the board and his executive. I think before even you started, I should have make my opening remarks and flag some issues that I think, though we are dealing with the annual report, but I expect the executive and Transnet to say something about those matters. I think we are engaging after some time, and we have not been engaging since some time ago. But there are developments that we would like to get a sense from Transnet side as to what extent are those dealt with, and get some kind of information just to put us on the same wavelength to understand those developments. I mean, issues such as corporatization of National Ports Authority and its impact on Transnet as an entity. There was also some cyber attacks on the systems of Transnet. We would like to get some kind of an update as to what happened and to what extent is that issue is being dealt. Also, there's been an announcement to the effect that there will be a retrenchment of 10% of the employees, among others, at Transnet. And we hope that also, as you continue briefing us doing this presentation, you sort of putting us in the same wavelength to understand exactly what contributing factors to do that kind of pronouncement. We still believe that Transnet is a backbone of our economy, and we can't afford to have a weak Transnet. As members of this legislative arm of the state, we're here to provide a support towards your developmental agenda, and we will not fail to provide you with all those kind of necessary support from us as politicians. There are all other issues pertaining to the port in, I think it's Gqeberha, where there was a cases of where group of workers that were fired, and later they won the case from CCMA or Labor Court. I'm not sure, but we heard and we have been bombarded with a lot of correspondence from them seeking for our intervention, because seemingly, despite that they won the case, and the Transnet has not been able to respond positively in terms of them going back to work. Therefore, all those information, I'm putting it when new, because I don't want to disturb the members when they are asking questions. I want to play, not necessarily raising my issue. I want, in the process of presentation, you give us those kind of information. Thank you very much. I'm sorry if DG, you would like to come back on those matters, or you will allow Transnet chairperson and the board, and the executive to deal with. Thanks. I give over to the chairperson of the board or the DG if the DG would like to come back.
Now, Chair, I'm good if the chair of the board can take over. Thank you so much.
Good morning, Chairperson and honorable members of the Portfolio Committee, directors, DG, and the executive management team. The annual report will be presented by the GCE and the team. The audit committee will play a critical role as well in that regard. in welcoming and appreciating the invitation to Transnet to meet with the Portfolio Committee. I wish that I be allowed to take a different approach to this question. And the approach that may well sound like a record with a scratch, because we have been saying this thing for probably the last 3 years. I think the impact of state capture on Transnet has been devastating. And that would become apparent in the audit of our annual financials, the irregularities that have been identified there. But it also becomes apparent to weaknesses in our operational performances, because our operational performances are also linked to the manner in which we contracted at the time when we procured locomotives, because these contracts did not include an element of maintenance of the equipment that we were procuring. The third issue was that because of the huge cost of the procurement, the company dipped very deep into its COPEX, with the result that there was no adequate rehabilitation of the infrastructure network, the network infrastructure on which the new locomotives were supposed to operate. But it didn't really, the problem didn't arise only in 2013, 2014. There had been decades of neglect of maintenance of our rail system generally. The third issue, the fourth issue is the challenges that we have experienced with regard to
recording in progress.
Trying to reduce the financial demand or constraint on Transnet in respect of investing in infrastructure, because the PSP would avail to us monies that would ordinarily not be available for us to invest in the expansion of the ports, the improvement of in Durban to reduce congestions there, as well as dealing with Gqeberha to make sure that we build it into an effective regional transshipment port. Then we have challenges of policy constraints, which we have been discussing with the government. Part of the problem of TFR relates also to, and as of course the ports, equipment, procurement of equipment on the port, arise out of the local content requirement. Our understanding initially was that local content requirement would mean that we should procure products that are manufactured in South Africa. But in its application, local content requirement has now included compelling state-owned companies to procure from middle persons, which means that you procure things that are not manufactured in South Africa, but from outside South Africa, but you are compelled to procure them through middle persons, who then put up their own markups. So even before you acquire your equipment, you have already lost a significant percentage of your budget for that particular equipment. So we've been engaging, of course, with the DTIC, the DPE, and recently last week, we met with National Treasury to deal with these things, because all of these things mean that we are not able to move the trains at the speed at which they have to be moved. And the cycle time also becomes elongated. The fourth issue, the next issue is, of course, the crime and vandalism of our network infrastructure, the stealing of overhead cables, even the rail itself is being taken away, and as well as sleepers on our railway lines. So all of these things suggest that, Chairperson, in order for Transnet to be able to operate effectively, we're going to need to mobilize, to summon all the energies and collective wisdom that includes the wisdom of the politicians. I like the idea that the Chairperson says we should look at what it is that that politicians can what kind of support can politicians give to Transnet to meet its challenges. I have really dealt crisply with these issues, Chairperson, because I'm expecting that they would be dealt with in detail in the submissions that we are making today. The corporatization of TNPA, we have moved in that regard. We corporatized it as a wholly owned subsidiary of Transnet. So the impact that we're worried about in the past with regard to the balance sheet of Transnet would not occur because TNPA will continue to be part of Transnet, save that it will have its own independent board, a board of subsidiary of Transnet. On cyber attacks, we will give, I'm sure, detailed report in that, and the VSPs. On Gqeberha workers, I'm not aware of this case. I think management would be able to tell us the facts in that regard. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Popomolefe, the Chairperson of Transnet Board. I think now we will be getting the presentation from the CEO.
Good morning, Honourable Chairperson and Honourable members, and the members of the Board of Transnet, DG of Public Enterprises, as well as the Executive of Transnet. Thank you for the opportunity to once again present on our performance in the last financial year ending 21 March 2021. Chair, the presentation we do in two bits, in two parts. I cover the overview, and Nonkululeko Dlamini, our CFO, will cover the financial performance. It was a tough year. There's no doubt about that. In the last financial year, given the extent of lockdowns, we were all dealing with a situation which was a first of a kind for most of us at the very least. But despite this, I would say that we have prevailed to some extent. We are still a company in trouble. We are still going through a process of recovery. There's a lot that we still need to do to get Transnet onto firmer footing and back to being a profitable, on a sustainable basis company, number one. Number two, to be once again what we believe is, without a doubt, a fact, a driver of performance and economic activity in the South African economy, and at least as far as it relates to our responsibilities as the logistics service provider. In this year, we're also actively making sure to engage with the issue of our efficiency and our performance, so that we improve in that direction without causing undue haste in a drive to wholesale introduce private sector participation. Not participation, let me say privatization or concessions all over the show. We will talk through the transactions, the process that we are undertaking, but this is obviously, Chair, not included in this presentation, as this is a results presentation. but would be more than happy at some future date to talk why the partnerships that we have proposed are absolutely essential to fund CapEx for us because of the issue of our balance sheet, which is a well-known fact, but also because we see great opportunities for growth with us continuing in partnership with the partners that we would be going through a process of selecting. If I may please go to the first slide. So what, in terms of the strategic review of Transnet, I think to my mind, one of the most significant shifts that we've undertaken, which enables us to have a organizational view of Transnet as one company, despite the fact that we are effectively 6 divisions, which some of them are really in very different lines of business, and probably with the exception of National Port Authority and port terminals. The top 9 commodities on our side, which contribute 42.9% to total GDP, make up about 80% of Transnet's revenue. As can be seen in the graph on the right-hand side, which identifies iron ore, manganese, coal, mining, mineral, this is chrome and magnetite, automotives, containers, fuel and chemicals, as well as a new entry from our side is natural gas. The other area that we have to start doing a lot more work on is a strategy for agriculture, and we've been working quite strongly with the sector to ensure that, to the extent that we are able to meet their requirements, in particular at the ports, and to find solutions on rail which are cost effective and efficient for them. The real challenges that we have, when you get back to the slide on the left-hand side, agriculture is a significant contributor to GDP. However, agriculture, automotive, and manufacturing tends to be located in containers, are all seriously time-sensitive commodities, because you move, or products, you move those products in demand to meet demand. Agriculture, you can't be too late because of seasonality factors. And to be honest, this poses a real challenge on rail, because we are not there yet in as far, and frankly, possibly a bit of a distance away from providing a scheduled train service, which would then ensure that there was direct reliability and certainty for exporters, that their product would be able to reach market at the time that it is anticipated. This is complicated to a large extent by issues like cable theft, as has been raised. Next slide, please. So if in reviewing the year, the previous year, April 2020 to March 2021, you would recall that there was a general global contraction of about 3.5%. There were projections, and we will see at the end of 2021 if indeed this 5.6% has been achieved. These recent lockdowns that have happened around the world now as a result of Omicron, we will see what impact they have on this projected 5.6, and then the next financial results, we'll also be able to reflect on what impact this had on us as Transnet. There's been a view, last year there was a view that there would be a huge government stimulus programs. As you very well know in our case, is that it doesn't seem to have generated the anticipated outcome in the last financial year. And definitely when we look at this year, at least for the first 6 months, we don't see the impact of the stimulus much in even our economy. We will talk a little about this issue, and I'll note it, Honourable Chair, to come back to these constraints that we see in the world of containers globally. I'll come back to that later on. And then lastly, what we are seeing, and we hope, to be frank, the latter half of 2022 into 2023, maybe we should start seeing real improvements. I mean, where we at in terms of vaccinations, both in South Africa and on the continent and also globally, until we get to a point where we don't have these opening and closings of the economies around the world, we are going to be in a really uncomfortable situation of constraints and opening of the economy, which would cause serious upswings and downswings in terms of performance. The South African context last year, you recall in April, S&P downgraded the sovereign, the country, the long-term foreign currency rating. And then in November last year, 2020, Moody's downgraded SA sovereign credit rating to junk status, which means that as a country, we are no longer investment grade. And that has the serious negative impact of causing a significant increase in the cost of capital when borrowing for not only the sovereign, but also for us who are sovereign-linked enterprises. And it's had some spillover effects to the general economy as well. The South African economy did contract by approximately 7.2% in 2020, but this was an expected contraction and would then have a general impact on Transnet, given the commodities that we move. National unemployment remains a problem, and you will know from last week's data where we see an increase from the 32.5 unemployment rate in Q4 2020 to where we currently are at now, which is 34.9. And that's really a huge problem that we have to deal with in South Africa. The further disconcerting factor is that 74.4% of the youth, which is like for every 4 young people in South Africa, over 3 are at home unemployed. Another seriously worrying factor, for every 2 Black people in South Africa, more than 1 are unemployed and don't have a job. That does not suggest sustainability at all. And unfortunately, at the end of the day, economic growth is not just a function of what you export. It also is a function of what's aggregated demand. With such high unemployment, the aggregated demand will remain low in South Africa. And that has a direct impact, not only on ourselves as logistics service provider, but also on the general economic growth as well, and prospects for that matter. Manufactured export fell by 5% because of the lockdown. We saw motor vehicle production was low. Basic iron and steel and petroleum products was low. In fact, the petroleum, and we see it a lot in the pipeline, was significantly low because as there was a closure of cross-border movements now and again, there were closures obviously of flying in and out of countries. That dampened completely demand for fuel in the whole economy, irrespective of sector. Transported goods decreased by 11.6% in South Africa. And then the domestic lockdown, as we've indicated, had a really negative impact on the economy. The impact on Transnet is that we see that Transnet's revenue were directly affected. These were reduced, and these would be further impacted by just general flows out of South Africa. The truth is, if you look at mining, the mining sector in the last financial year, and we must look at the last financial year, most of the mining companies have their reporting period at the end of December, as the end of the financial year. Causes all kinds of issues, and maybe that's an issue that we should come back to the committee and explain, so that when you read data, you understand sometimes why there's a disjuncture between their reports and then finally, ultimately, when we come out with our reports. But even mining, for that matter, was dampened by the first couple of weeks when we had the hard lockdown. The biggest contributor to us on the mining side is coal. Whenever coal goes down or goes up, we do quite well. However, we've had quite some serious problems in terms of the delivery on the rail system in significant and large measure as a result probably of three factors. One, the historical underinvestment on the track. There's no running away from that. Is that you have a system designed to run at 80 kilometers per hour. You don't invest in it, you introduce speed restrictions, you cannot move the volumes that you would want to ideally be moving. You also don't do a replacement program and maintenance program of your track. You have an increase in derailments. And then we have the added problem of the significant amount of cable theft. In 10 months, I think it's in this year, but Cesar Zamel is also on the call, we lost over 1,000 kilometers of copper cable, which means that for a system which is a mixture of diesel and electric, whenever there's a loss, whenever there's cable theft, the system is blocked until such time that you can reinstate the electricity. And by that time, you've caused a sequential blockage right across the system, because not only are we then not able to move back containers to those that need to move back to clients, neither are we able to go to the market. So it's quite a significant feedback loop, which is negative in our case, given the cable theft. Furthermore, we replace the cables at our cost. We don't share the cost with the customers. And that's not sustainable anymore, because effectively that's a cost that Transnet is carrying on its own on behalf of the entire economy. Something has to give in as far as that's concerned. I think I've spoken to that. Can we go to the next slide, please? So, how we have responded to external events as Transnet. In the last financial year, and frankly, we all didn't know how long the close would last from when it happened in March 2020 up to April 2021, but we made the decision that we would keep all our staffs, the 55,827 employees. And then over and above that, we also didn't have an idea, like everyone else, how long the shut would be. And as a state-owned enterprise, frankly, we've not modernized in being able to introduce employee flexibility, so that when we were not making money, as we were not in certain or much less, when revenue was much less than cost, we were not able to cut what is probably our most significant cost, which is labor cost. So we carried that fully. That would have an impact on our financial performance, without a doubt. It has. And I suppose this is an area that does require engagement, is how do we introduce greater flexibility in the employment terrain, so that we are able to find ways and means to weather the storms and still be able to be a net contributor to employment in South Africa. But be that as it may, we retained all our staff. To date, honorable members, we have lost 155 employees to COVID. Thankfully, so far, as a result of Omicron, we have not had any lives lost. However, the amount of infections have definitely increased. We then also commenced with the implementation of a cash preservation program. Now, this may have protected our finances to some extent. One of the members during the course of the year asked a very pointed question around our ability to continue servicing our debt. So what we were really worried about was to make sure that we met all of our repayment obligations in the financial year, so that we would be able to continue being a company with borrowing. Now, we've got to be very careful when we undertake such measures, is that you don't cause a blockage to the whole operations. But bearing in mind that when we started the year, we were looking for cash right across the group that would fund quite significant capital investments, and actually more often than not, just basic maintenance across the group. Now, if I may just pause, Transnet in the previous year may not have made the loss that it's made in this year. And when I say the previous year, previous to March 2020 to April 2020 to March 2021. However, and you'll see that in later slides, Transnet has had habitually been a net borrower, not just for expansion capital, but also for operations. And that actually is an important point to remember, honorable members and honorable chair, because one of the things that we are trying to shift, and that's hard, is to move Transnet towards living within its means, which means that we fund operations directly from the revenue that we collect, and then we fund expansions using both debt and as well as using other people's money to the extent that we're able to in the form of partnerships. Now, if I just give you a flavor of what happened in the last financial year, and in fact, as you watch as we go towards in this current year, is that you have an entity that requires the 14 billion to be able to fund its activities, to be able to fund infrastructure and maintenance. But our cash situation is such that we were only able to give 8.1 billion rand to the entity. Now, this is consistent right across the group, and it's an area that we need to work really hard to start redressing, because even if you said there was fat in the 14 billion rand, it's not fat to the equivalent nearly of 5 billion rand. So we continue to underinvest in maintenance and rehabilitation of the system. And so that means that the system is going to continue to suffer until such time we are able to redress that. To a large extent, honorable members, that's why the partnership strategies are essential, because they give us a little bit of a breather in as far as getting growing our balance sheet so that we can deal with our debt to equity ratio, bringing in other money to fund the growth opportunities whilst we focus on the investment. But these details, honorable members, will be presented for the next financial year. Happy to ask the team to look at how we did capital allocations in the last financial year, April 2020 to 21. We have continued, as we indicated, implementing on the maintenance and sustaining of investments, and frankly, basically paused any expansion activities because we didn't have the cash to fund the expansions at all. The balance sheet has remained resilient, however, because we focused on making sure that we stayed strong enough to be able to continue to make our payments. The pandemic and the last financial year has hit us. There's no two ways about it, but we push on. And as far as the delegation framework, a core issue that we've been dealing with, and we're nearly done with the new framework, was to start focus on how we can empower to the lowest level, to the lowest operational level, because that's where business actually engagement with customers actually happens, and where decisions for business have to be undertaken. We are constantly refining that so that we can increase agility of the business. We've also, on the rail and security, both on rail as well as in the pipeline, we have enhanced our capacity and investment in that area so that we can be able to protect our infrastructure. In the last financial year, it was still really rough. In this year, it remains rough, but we think that we're starting to get to a point where we have better management of the situation. But to be very frank, on the rail network side, we make progress, and then it also gets worse again. So we're not, if we look at the data, we have not reached any stability. So one of the issues that we're looking at is a conversion of the greater part of our system away from electric to diesel. To be frank, the American Class A railroads are fundamentally diesel. They're not electric for different reasons, right enough, but they're fundamentally diesel. So it wouldn't be odd if we moved in that direction. We have our partnership strategy is definitely where we are saying we're driving our growth and renewal strategy for Transnet. There are definite, I mean, would be the last ones to argue that we have definite areas of inefficiency in Transnet that need to be improved. Some of them around modernization of planning, of scheduling of our activities. And we also need to continue the programs of keeping up to date with developments across the world with the latest technologies and techniques. And then if you go to the next slide, yes, please. This slide, Chair, we try to go as a summary, basically, of the performance of the individual operating divisions, but all of the CEOs are on the call, so they would be more than happy to provide additional details if necessary. So let's start with freight rail. If you look, revenues were just under 39.5 billion, OPEX 25 billion, and CAPEX was 11.9 in the last financial year, which is up to March 2021. We also were able to reopen the Leeuwfontein link, which has improved the speed and service delivery to the auto industry and reduced the route as indicated by 60 kilometers. There was a Thornwood section on what we're calling the container corridor, which is the line from Gauteng to Durban, which caused significant bottlenecks on capacity bottlenecks on that corridor. That was reopened, and we added another 27 train slots onto the system. So that's been quite useful. However, cable theft continues to be a serious concern on that. That's one of the first systems that we would be prioritizing for de-electrification, basically, if we are going to be able to increase reliability of rail, and therefore be able to move a lot more cargo from road to rail. What we've also been doing is a lot more collaboration in terms of providing supply chain solutions, back of ports facilities, and improved terminal utilization, and that you'll see again as we proceed in the financial year. These are opportunities that we've been pushing in this financial year and going forward. We are looking for growth enabling partnerships between customers. Already we have quite a few customers who own their own wagons, their wagon fleets, and so we're looking to increase the number of customers who own wagons, whilst ensuring that we do not prejudice the operations of BEE companies or new entrants who might not have balance sheets able to buy their own fleets. But it is useful because that would free up cash that we require, that enables us to continue with the maintenance program, and that increases the infrastructure that we then have available for operations. We've also looked at a much more efficient process for dealing with sidings and branch lines in terms of finding partners, which is much more focused on partners or siding operators who are able to increase the volumes of cargo that we're able to move on rail, and in particular in the areas of bulk, which we can move long, which enables us to move those very long and heavy trains. We will be coming up with a little bit more of an improved strategy for branch line operations, which will ensure that a lot more of them become commercially viable, as opposed to what has been the situation where double handling makes them just a useless investment by and large. But there's definitely improvement in as far as that's concerned. The reform of the container corridor is really crucial for us to get to a point where we are able to move more of the manufacturing type commodities. Now, a distinctive characteristic of manufacturers is that, first of all, they're dispersed. So they're not like a mine where you go to one mine or two mines and you can be able to load anything up to 100, 200 wagons in a very small geographic area where the resource locates itself. Manufacturing is an entirely different kettle of fish. You have somebody who wants to want to move a certain number of stoves, dishwashers, or whatever it is, and that may fill 1 or 2 containers. We ideally would like to run 75 wagon container trains to the Port of Durban. Now, that means that for us to get to the filled 75 wagons, we would never be able to run a reliable service, because until the train is full, until we have the 75 wagons, you have difficulty in moving. So we're working really closely with the 4PLs. Around 4PLs are the logistics providers who help with the consolidation of the cargo. Oftentimes, when you see a truck, a cargo truck, on the, for example, that Durban-Gauteng road, it actually is not cargo of one company. It's often cargo of 2 or 3 companies that has been consolidated into one container, which is not the same. So moving cargo of road from manufacturing onto rail is not entirely the easiest thing. So we're working really closely to find a viable business model that would ensure that at least the corridor covers its cost. At present, that corridor is the most unprofitable by far of our entire system, seriously unprofitable. For example, for a rand that we collect, I think it costs us over 250 rand to run the system. Moving on to Transnet engineering, as you can see, just by looking at the revenue and the OPEX, as well as the CAPEX, that this business continues to be in trouble. We'll talk a little bit about what we're doing. And the trouble arises fundamentally because there's no manufacturing work. There's a lot of work that's available on maintenance. And in the next financial year, we'll discuss a lot more around how we've also extended their scope beyond just looking at TFR, but to look at ports, both on the landlord, the National Port Authority, as well as port terminals. However, they've also, as the company, had some great successes. The port hauler, which pulls 2 containers, which until now we have imported as South Africa, is now being in the process of being commissioned. We should actually soon be able to reliably supply TPT, whatever demand it might have. And that helps reduce imports. It's linked up with the local manufacturing supply chain, so it should have some benefits directly into the economy. But we really look forward to starting to get orders from TPT for this. We also, TE was able to secure a contract to supply wagons, 300 wagons to CFM of Mozambique of 360 million. CFM and Mozambique remain a really crucial partner for us. For the magnetite and chrome route, it is the shortest route to the port. What that does for us on the rail side is that it ensures that we can have an efficient allocation of resources in as far as locals and wagons are concerned. So that efficiency improvement is really crucial for us. So our relationship with CFM is something that we are very desirous of as Transnet. As you would know, which was announced in the press, they amazingly built within 3 months a vaccine chain, Transvaco train. And this train is able to carry any vaccine, irrespective of the temperature at which the vaccine has to be stored, and it's already deployed. It operates in the system at present. In fact, as a result of the innovations we introduced with Transvaco, we've been able to convert all pillow pepper trains also to become vaccination trains able to carry the vaccines at the required temperature. So really exciting for us. Opportunities going forward. We're looking to see how we might continue to supply own rolling stock. We've had a really torrid time of spares, trying to secure spares for the long-standing locals that we have. And would say, and I think Ralph and his team, and credit to them, we've now been able, and this is not a development in the last financial year, but it's a more recent development, have been able to make our own compressors. Am I right, Ralph? Is it the compressors or rather the traction motors?
Yeah, what we've done is reverse engineered old compressors from previous generation locomotives to fit the Chinese locomotives, which have been a key challenge that we've had of late. We have 151 locomotives waiting for compressors at this stage. Thanks.
Thanks, Rob. So what, honourable members, it means is that finally the compressors, which were won because as a result of the 1064 review application, the Chinese suppliers have basically refused to deal with us. And even when we've tried to get other partners, other companies to supply us, who may have actually the IP and be able to supply China as well, they've been blocked from supplying us. So we had to find a way to deal with this. And really, I'm pleased to say that we've been able to do that. And the area that the TE is working on a lot is componentry, so that we can be able to do a lot more of the component replacement ourselves. But bearing in mind that whatever we do and the way we operate, we do not kill the viability of the private sector, the manufacturing, because there's actually quite an extensive manufacturing sector that is focused on the rail sector in South Africa. So we're working with the DTIC as well as the IDC to ensure that we find ways and means of supporting the companies in the sector who have struggled as much as we have struggled in the recent while. Next slide, please. A focus on the TE side is rolling stock upgrade, fabrication and remanufacture to the maximum extent possible. And this is a service that we're looking to offer across the continent in partnership with the utilities on the continent. In as far as the National Ports Authority, one really important development, which has improved at least communication and also alignment, is the establishment of a joint planning structure every morning at all of the container terminals in Durban, Cape Town, and PE, so that both the knowledge of what are the volumes that need to move, what vessels are being nominated, is absolutely crucial in terms of enabling TNPA to plan for the system as well. There's also been an increase in rail utilized in Durban, which has really helped with the congestion at the port. We moved from 1 train every 2 weeks, and now we have 4 trains a week, and we see opportunity to increase further beyond that. The inland terminals, which would be decongestion terminals, are then quite crucial going forward. In as far as manganese, we've seen increased parcel sizes at the port of Port Elizabeth, from 42,000 tons to 54,000 tons. And that's useful and important for the economy in Gqeberha going forward. And then at Ngqura Container Terminal, we've seen an increase from 50,000 tons to 60,000 tons in that area. That's really useful because it's a direct revenue generator for us. Where the opportunities that we see going forward in Richards Bay, both with the LNG and the petrochemicals, as part of the Durban Master Plan development, a lot more petrochemicals would move up to Durban. We're in the process of finalizing the Port Master Plan and ensuring that we've accommodated to the best of our abilities the existing industry, whilst balancing out the issue of health for the people who live and run that area. So we're looking at the issues of emissions and air quality in the Bluff area. As you would know, there's a huge population mass that locates itself there. The advantage of Richards Bay is that it remains a fundamental industrial port. Durban Port Point Container Terminal expansion, that's the immediate next project that we'll be undertaking. TNPA is definitely going to have to look seriously at deepening of Maiden Wharf, so that on the agricultural side, we would be able to start taking much bigger containers, and that would improve the efficiency and performance of the agricultural terminal. In Cape Town, we're looking at fast-tracking the truck staging so that we'd be able to have greater efficiency and deal with any congestion that might arise at the port. Saldanha, we're looking at the expansion of manganese capacity and iron ore. Manganese by an additional 2 million tons from the current 6 million tons, and iron ore we've applied for an additional 7 million tons. However, we have to make sure that in both these areas, we have taken into account the impact of the additional emissions on the health of our people. So we have a study which we are undertaking, and we will be taking the report from the University of Cape Town, who are doing an independent assessment of what's the impact on health and people. Now, it's a crucial issue, this, because it then raises a real challenge how far are we from reaching the capacity constraint in Saldanha? And we have to start looking at a new export channel for iron ore, because, as you know, we have to make sure that we protect our people. In East London, we are finalizing the inclusion of the Gately site into the port limit, because it has to be part of the port limit for it to be under the TNPA. RFPs, Section 56 will be coming out to close on this. In Ngqura, The liquid bulk terminal is being built by CDC is the project manager, and it's their project with the private sector. Unfortunately, we've had to extend the closure of the tank farm in Gqeberha until such time that CDC's project has been commissioned. We anticipate that would be sometime next year. Then we would be able to move the whole of, shut down the terminal in Gqeberha and move the industry directly into Mocha. And then in Port Elizabeth, at the port of Port Elizabeth, a lot has been written about Ford's expansion plans and the intention to use that port as its primary route in and out of South Africa. We're working hard with the DTIC as well as the IDC, Gauteng government, the Eastern Cape government, and every other agency that we would be able to help fast track the project to ensure that we deliver this project on time. Ford's deadline is 2025. Frankly, as things stand right now, 2026 looks like it, but we're all trying to see if we might be able to meet the 2025 deadline. And then at port terminals, we introduced the mandatory truck booking systems at DCT, Pier 1 and Pier 2, definitely improved traffic flows to the terminal. However, recently we've discovered that there may be a rule in the scheduling which is creating a bias against the small trucking companies. We're fixing that so that there's equity between the large truck owners as well as the small truck owners. We're also talking quite a lot with the private sector about them moving a lot more, and the larger companies, frankly, towards a 24/7 operation. Our ports can operate 24/7, but what we find is bunching during daylight hours. And if we were able to move everyone towards spread out into the evening, into the night, so that we run a 24-hour service, the improvements in port efficiency would be significant. Not only for TPT, but also just for the entire system. We will have to start figuring out how we create incentives for more customers to move at night and to reduce the volumes during the day. But it does require that there is improved security for truckers. As you know, in the last week, once again, there were the attacks around wherever. We need to find, even ourselves, is to find points, places closer to the port or along the route where they can wait safely for their slot, because one of the challenges for them is that when they're waiting, is it safe? And so that's why they end up waiting, clogging roads close to the city. DCT during the hard lockdown was restricted to a single berth operation, which significantly impacted operations, and we only had two gangs. TPT was able to recover to 60%, where we were back to 8 gangs. Now we're in the process. We're finally restored it to 12 gangs operational, and we're training so that we can be back to about 14 gangs. The CEOs on the call, the acting CEOs on the call as well. If there are any other details you'd like to get on TPT, these will be provided. And as far as opportunities going forward, the partnerships are absolutely crucial for us. The DCT partnership in particular is to enable us to modernize the operations, and frankly, we need a little bit of financial support to implement a world-class maintenance program, which is as per design, to meet the design requirements of the various OEMs. Number one. Number two, we definitely need to move away from buying all kinds of non-OEM parts, which immediately impacts, frankly, the warranties that we have from the suppliers of the equipment. We have a lot of that kind of problem in the system, and we're fixing that as well. The increase, as I've indicated, to 14 gangs in DCT will improve performance significantly. We need to create a pool of OLEs. OLEs are operators of lifting equipment, and these often become a constraint in our system. What we need to be able to do is have the fluidity in our system, that when there's demand at one port, we are able to move OLEs to another port. We also need to make sure that they're trained in interoperability, that they don't only just operate one piece of equipment, that they operate other pieces of equipment as well. partnering with the OEMs for MSAs, master service agreements, so that we can have better maintenance and also access to consignment stocks using the OEMs as well, where they would hold additional parts that we might require. But a really important focus on this side is getting Transnet Engineering to better support large, what is it? I suppose I should say D-checks, the larger non-frequent maintenance that's required for big pieces of equipment, because the ports are fundamentally also capital intensive. And then the back to basics operations. This has been made absolutely crucial by the recent fires that we had in Richards Bay. The last two operating divisions, pipelines and properties. As you can see, revenues on pipelines, we really suffered in this financial year, 4.8 billion rand, OPEX of 4.9, and a large driver on the OPEX side has been as a result of environmental remediation as a result of oil spills when there has been fuel theft in the system. However, we are able to exceed the orders versus delivered volumes, but really this is performance of a low base. We are putting in technology to help monitor and manage vandalism on the pipeline, and also we're expediting R&D to see how we might be able to repurpose some of the existing pipeline network and the associated infrastructure. And this in particular relates to the DJP, the so-called DJP, which is the Durban to Joburg pipeline, which has been decommissioned. And we've been trying to see how we might be able to use the servitude for other activities. The opportunities going forward is the provision of, we need to get partners, frankly, to use more the multi-purpose product pipeline. We are nowhere near at full capacity, and we need to figure out how to attract particularly the non-aligned wholesalers, given the fact that there's been such a significant change in the fuel, in the petrochemicals sector, or the fuel retail sector, basically between diesel and petrol, with non-aligned wholesalers coming in, non-aligned to the engines, the BPs and the shunts, the independent operators. We're also looking to develop a fuel import terminal and accumulator facilities in Durban. As you'd be aware, Engine, which is a refinery in Durban, is shut down as a refinery. They want to use their facilities fundamentally for storage. The Chevron, which is now called Astron in Cape Town, is going to continue to manufacture, to produce directly. And then there's also Sapref, which is in Durban, which was the Shell and BP operation. From what we understand, they're looking to dilute and get another partner there. So the opportunity, frankly, is for an industry which is a lot more import intensive as opposed to local production intensive. That creates opportunities, again, for particularly new entrants to partner with us in the ownership of the accumulator tanks so that they can be able to have direct access to product. In last year, there was a time when there were shortages of product, and what we were able to see is that the non-aligned filling stations had real problems accessing product because what the companies aligned to the engines, BPs and the rest of the line were prioritized for supply. So definitely the independents need to have for themselves access to capacity to meet their market needs. And then an area that we're working hard and fast on is with regard to gas infrastructure. Both the storage, regasification units, as well as the pipeline. Our priority, two areas, both in Ngqura. You would have seen the RFP that was issued by CDC. We are part of the joint development of that project on the side of TNPA as well as the side of TPL. And then as Transnet, we are also working quite closely with the huge demand that we're seeing from industry in Richards Bay. As you know, in Richards Bay, we own the Lily pipeline, which comes down, but right now is the flow from Sasol to Richards Bay area, and also it has a link down to Durban. In the next 2 years or so, it's going to be back available to us, and we will have to look at whether we reverse the flow and use it for LNG. And that would enable the distribution of energy both into Richards Bay, up into down into Durban, as well as starting to supply extensively into the Gauteng market, which is, to my mind, and I think many, is a quite long anticipated development, which should help a lot with fuel security. And then lastly, properties. We recently ring-fenced property and moved it away from being just a cost center, but to be a revenue generator. It is really crucial for the Transnet balance sheet, because that's an asset base that's been under-leveraged, underutilized, and really just seriously not loved at all. It's not our best performing unit. It really has long to go, huge debts, but real progress is being made in terms of implementing the new strategy that was approved by the board. We've also, in this financial year, but by last year, they started the work to move us as Transnet out of rental stock into our own buildings, which helps then with the upkeep and the maintenance and actually reinvestment, first and foremost, in our own assets. It has become the hub for all Transnet's immovable property asset holdings, if it's not those that are not at the port, and those are not crucial directly for rail operations. We look forward to seeing much better, some interesting moves in terms of the strategy that it implements going forward. What are the opportunities? First of all, as indicated, they will be providing accommodation for all of Transnet, all of the various ODs, and they've already started doing that. We're in the process of disposing our non-core residential properties, primarily to our own employees, where they directly live. We want to develop the Gqeberha waterfront, Carlton precinct, Carlton Centre precinct, as well as Adderley Square, which is our core, in fact, probably our most valuable property assets that we have. This we should come out into the market in this financial year. We're also working quite closely with Dubai Trade. Dubai Trade. What are they called? Kapai is the Dubai Trade Ports, or in any case, the SEZ at King Shaba.
Dubai Trade Portia.
Okay, yes. We're working with Dubai Trade Port to develop an auto supplier park servicing Toyota in the first instance, but ours is to be open to anyone who wants to be a supplier to the auto park using Durban International Airport. Our intention is to keep Durban International Port within the stable of Transnet, because our view that around 2045 or so, there might be need for an expansion of Durban beyond the 11.3 million TEUs that we have planned. I think this is my last slide, Chair. In as far as transformation, we are level 2 BEE company, and the intention is that to always be the worst case scenario. And as far as BEE spend, triple BEE spend, we spent nearly 23.4 billion on Black-owned businesses, 12.9, on women-owned enterprises, 7.9 billion. On EMEs, we spent 4 billion. We're doing a lot more work to refine our procurement so that we have a greater geographic impact in our procurement. It's a bit of a struggle, frankly, getting National Treasury across the line with that, because it is, first of all, just as a matter of justice. It makes no sense that you would have somebody just standing guarding a building in Vryheid, not being from a company that's from Vryheid. Why that company should come from Joburg, just because we have a rule that says that all procurement must be competitive, transparent, and in as fast the current rules are, is that it must be open to the whole economy. And our view is that we have to shift from that to having some procurement which is just in that geography and not in the broader economy. Firstly. Secondly, what tends to happen when people are unhappy with any service delivery from their local government, they simply go and occupy a Transnet asset, and the preferred asset for occupation is rail. They sit on the line and they just don't move, and they know the trains will not move. So it is essential that we find a way to have a much happier working relationship with those communities so that they don't do that and find something else as their instrument of protest. And as far as employment, we've already indicated over 55,827 permanent employees in Transnet. We don't anticipate a significant change in this direction. Safe to say, Honourable Chair, as you raised the issue of retrenchments, the one area we have a problem with, because we've not been able to secure additional business, is in TE manufacturing. We really are struggling, and maybe next year, early next year, I would propose that the portfolio committee comes and visits TE, and we talk you through the strategy. You see everything that we're doing so that we can enhance understanding. On skills development, 1.6% of our personnel costs amounting to 462 million was spent on skills development. A really important movement in here is that we've consolidated all of our training schools, training institutes, our schools of engineering under one umbrella body, which is the Transnet Academy. The intention in from this and the next financial year is that we are planning to maximize the utilization of all of our training academies. But we must say that our first priority is just our own people. We're finding that we have significantly focused on training of all of our people, getting all of the license up to date. Most of our operations require, both in rail as well as port terminals, require that our people are constantly re-licensed. So we need to prioritize that, but also are very clear that we would make this available as capacity for broader training in the economy. Health and safety remains a really critical area of focus for us, and frankly, we don't do very well. We lost 4 colleagues in operations last year. Our lost time injury frequency rate, the tolerance is 0.75 with 0.61. Need to see a further reduction. Disabling injuries, 424 people. We had 95 public fatalities. That remains a problem, especially at rail crossings, and we continue engaging with the local government and localities to try and find lasting solutions for some of these problems. Had 70 running line derailments, and we had 122 shunting derailments. In as far as additional factors around transformation, Black employees, 90.3% of the total employee base, women in EXCO, 40%, people with disabilities at 2.2%, way below the percentage representation of people with disabilities in the economy, which is close on 7%. So we're working on improving our performance in that area. Professional Black cadre, Black employees, 3,212, and the skilled Black employees, 14,606, and this is per BE codes. Next slide, please. I will stop here. Chair, I think, Honourable Chairperson, I think at some point we do come back in the presentation and we cover subsequent events, and amongst the subsequent events are some of the issues that you raised, like the corporatization of TNPA, as well as cyber attacks, and we add also the looting and the fires in Richards Bay, but we'll return to close on that. Thank you very much. I'll hand over to Nonkululeko.
Thank you, GCE.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, honorable members, the chairperson of the portfolio committee, and the members, the honorable members, the chairperson of the board of Transnet, as well as the board members present, and my colleagues at management level. Chairperson, I would cover the financial numbers that a lot has been said about in the context that was given by the chairperson of the board, as well as a number of areas that the GCE covered in her presentation. So if we move to the next slide, just to give the committee high-level numbers of what appears in our detailed financial statements as indicated, and the challenges that we faced, both from the COVID impact as well as operational challenges that were highlighted. We saw our revenue line dropping by about 10.5%, and we reported 67.3 billion rands as the revenue that Transnet made in the financial year 2021, in comparison to about 75 billion that we had reported in the prior year. I will break down these numbers in the slides that follow, just to give the committee a sense of what was the impact that came from various elements that have already been mentioned. In the second instance, Chairperson, the operating expenses in the expenses as in the normal course of business fairly remained the same, except for where we were able to reduce the expenditure and through cash preservation, as it was mentioned by the GCE. But we also, on the other hand, had to put through some significant provisions, and they again relate to the issues that have been mentioned in relation to theft, that then requires that Transnet take certain actions. And as a result, our operating expenditure at net level at 47.8 billion rands, which is an increase of about 16.2% compared to the prior year. And therefore, if you take the reduction in revenue and an increase in expenditure, you then see a significant reduction in earnings before you take into account the interest, the depreciation, the tax, which is basically the earnings from operations largely, which then reduced by about 42.8% to the levels of 19.5 billion rands. This taken together then resulted in Transnet reporting a net loss position of 8.4 billion in comparison to a profit in the prior year that was 2.9 billion rands. That is the income statement performance, Chair, that we report in detail in our financials. But having said that, Transnet continued to be a cash generating business, although it was at much lower levels than we would have wanted, where 24.4 billion was reported as cash generated from the activities of the business. Also, we continued to spend money on capital investments, but in the context of the COVID year, the activities were fairly low on site, specifically from April to about September, when we were still operating at the levels of level 5 lockdown, moving down to 4, 3, and so on. And as a result of the reduced activity on site with lockdown, we didn't do as much activity in relation to capital investment that we would have wanted to drive in the year being reported on. Chairperson, we continue to utilize monies from capital markets to ensure that Transnet is self-sustaining from its operations, but also we leverage the balance sheet through the raising of money. And it's a number we monitor very closely. We reported gearing levels of 48.7 in the year past, which is fairly in the range that we would want, but we would still want to see improvement on the gearing level without stopping to utilize and leverage the balance sheet and utilize monies from the capital markets. The ratio that is cash interest cover is a ratio that we also monitor very closely, because from the raising of funds from the capital markets, we want to be comfortable that the interest is actually covered by the money that we generate from operations. At minimum, we would want that ratio to be 2.5 times at minimum, and we would be comfortable at the levels of about 3. But with the current performance that we mentioned on the revenue line, we dropped the interest, cash interest coverage to 2 times. And again, as we work through the operations, we do want to see that ratio improving. The last 3 elements, the training costs, the BBBE expenditure, and the lost time injury frequency rate, I think the GCE has spoken to at length. And therefore, I'll move to the next slide to just give a bit of a detail on each of the numbers that I have mentioned. But maybe before we get to the details of the numbers, how we reflected on the performance for the year as well, Chairperson, was we looked at the impact of the legacy issues that the chairperson of the board highlighted, because some of the things that impacted the financial numbers are matters that are coming from quite a long history with Transnet, including some of the provisions we had to make in relation to third-party claims, the COVID-19 impact we've highlighted, and the security matters that are driven by the issues, socioeconomic issues of cable theft and impacting the line. But also you see a double whammy in that regard, because with the security expenditure, you also have to spend money rehabilitating the environment once there has been a damage, which again is carried by Transnet in the provisions that we have to make. The other matter we highlight, Chairperson, is where we have overdue debt, where we've got some of our clients who have not been servicing the debt or paying the amounts owing to Transnet, which then reduces the available cash for the operations of Transnet. The interest rollovers come from the debt. Transnet would have raised a significant amount of debt over years, probably dating back to 2012-13 as the MDS strategy was being driven. And the reality that Transnet faces now is that that debt needs to be paid back whilst we try to raise new debt for the operations and the capital expenditure that is required to work on the infrastructure. And therefore, the impact in the interest that we have to pay is quite significant, whilst we have to look at the debt and ensure that we meet all the maturities as they fall due and continue to raise debt where the funding is required. So it's an area of focus, but again, it's about dealing with matters that are coming from quite the history of Transnet. We are on a recovery journey, and a number of pegs have been put on the ground, including a matter I will deal with a bit later, where in terms of just dealing with the compliance with the PFMA, we've had to put down a loss control function to just make sure we work through the requirements of PFMA and close the long history that has resulted in Transnet reporting qualified reports over a period of about 4 years now. And when these matters started, the board in 2018 put together a remedial plan, which we have been reviewing over time as we were taking in the lessons we've been learning to ensure that we improve until we can arrest the issues around the PFMA. But also there is significant amount of work that is being done to basically transform the procurement space in improving the control environment, automating the systems. But that doesn't take away the requirements we have for the support to unlock certain things as they were articulated by the chair of the board in relation to the application of the PFMA in supporting the speed of our procurement requirements. We are also driving a process of stepping back when we do the budget and ensuring that we go zero-based in the requirements and ensure that we can clean up any expenditure that we don't need to incur, and rather provide for the requirements that will assist Transnet to perform and improve where required. The GCE will come back after I've presented Chairperson to talk a bit more about the strategy of renewal and growth that we are driving, which we believe will also assist in improving the performance, but also in ensuring that Transnet contributes to the required economic growth in the country. So the balance sheet cleanup is quite a focus for us from the perspective of ensuring that it continues to be a resilient balance sheet, but also the restructuring of debt, as I indicated, that we do need to be comfortable that we do not have significant amounts of debt that are maturing in a very short term, which makes it difficult to constantly be trying to move the debt out, because we are very clear, Chairperson, that we will not be able to necessarily pay back all the funding that is due and maturing, but rather we are wanting to engage with our lenders to refinance some of the debt and make sure we prolong the payment requirements, whilst as much as possible we do pay back from the monies that we are making from the operations. So if I move to the next slide, Chairperson, just to show a bit of details in the breakdown of the revenue and the volumes that we derive the revenue from, it is a significant reduction from the performance we saw in the 2020 financial year, where we see that we performed at the rail volumes at 183 million tons compared to the 212 million tons in the year before, and that contributes about 51% of our revenue line. In the port containers as well as the petroleum, and again, you can see that with the reduction of movement in the country, there wasn't much requirement for the petroleum movement, which then shows itself very specifically in the Transnet performance for the year ended 31st March 2021. The operating expenses breakdown, Chair, is on the next slide. And again, there you would see that if we look at the 47.8 billion that we reported in the year, about 51% is coming from the personnel costs that we indicated earlier as being 55,000 people that were kept intact, even though there were COVID challenges in the year. We also spend quite a bit on electricity costs with our trains needing electricity as well as the fuel costs. So we just highlight a few of the significant contributors. And costs of Transnet are largely fixed, at least in the short term, as we do not necessarily have an opportunity to release people at short notice, and it requires a significant amount of engagements and processes to get to a point where you can reduce some of the costs that are fixed. However, even with that, we did look for opportunities to reduce and show cost savings where it was possible through a cash preservation program that we ran, which assisted in cushioning the impacts in the year that we report on. Now, Chair, on the next slide, we try to give the committee a bit of a detail on how we moved from a profit of 2.9 billion rands to a loss of 8.4 billion rands. And if we look at the details of that, the first group is related to the reduction in revenue that I indicated that we moved from 75 billion to about 67. And therefore we lost a whopping 7.9 billion in revenue in the year, largely driven by the COVID impact, but also all the issues of cable theft that the chairperson referred to, which then result in operational challenges in the business and us not being able to move as much as we would want to. So that is 7.9 billion rands on the revenue that we lost. On the operating expenses, we also increased what resulted in a loss position, operating expenses by about 6.7 billion rands. And if we look at the breakdown of that additional expenditure of 6.7 billion rands, about half of it, which is 3.6 billion, comes from a matter that Transnet has been dealing with over years, where there is a Sasol Total matter that we've been dealing with through the courts, basically to ensure that the contracting arrangements that are in place are fair to Transnet. And the process is going through court processes at the moment, but we took a prudent approach to make some provisions in relation to this, to these claims, to the value of 3.6 billion rands. And as the court processes progress, we believe that we have an opportunity to reverse the provisions that we've made. In the second instance, we had to again make significant provisions in relation to environmental rehabilitation that is required. And this is really driven by the fact that as the pipelines are tapped again by people that are stealing fuel from Transnet's assets, we then have an issue that first we lose the revenue through the lost fuel. But in the second instance, because of the spillage to the ground, Transnet has a responsibility to rehabilitate the land. And these are the provisions that we have to make in preparation for that. And that is another 1.2 billion requirement that we had to put through. We also provided for COVID requirements because when we did the budget, it was not expected that 2021 financial year would be the COVID year, but we had to safeguard the people, and a provision of about 232 million rands was put through for all the requirements in relation to just supporting the COVID impact. So that is 6.7 billion rands. And then there is another 1.6 billion rands where we had to provide for some impairments. And the impairments of the assets are driven by the vandalism that Transnet experiences of the locomotives, which then need to be repaired. And in the process of these assets being vandalized, we have to impair and in certain instances write off, and then the repair has to happen. The second instance is where you then experience derailments as well, and the derailments results in some of the assets being affected, where we also have to impair those assets. But we try and recover as much as possible from the insurance provisions that we have, as much as we are covered. We also had to look at the balance sheets and review what was sitting as capital work in progress and assess whether the assets that were seen as capital work in progress would ultimately get into commercial operation and deliver revenue. And in the assessment we made, it was clear to us that there are some assets that would have to be impaired and removed from the balance sheets. If you can just go back to that slide that you've moved off, please. Yes, so we had to make additional provisions to basically impair some of the assets, basically to clean up the balance sheet. And therefore, Chairperson, if you take these three big numbers where we lost revenue of 7.9 billion, yet we had to make provisions for about 6.7 billion and impair some of our assets to the value of 1.6 billion. Those are the very significant contributors to us moving from the 2.9 billion profit to a loss position of 8.4 billion. And some of which we believe into the future should not be the items that would repeat themselves in our performance going forward, specifically in relation to some of the significant provisions. If I can then move to the next slide and we look at the balance sheet itself, as I indicated earlier, we have continued to work with the capital markets to raise money. And we closed the year with a debt of 129 billion. We raised some additional debt, but also, Chair, all the maturities that were due in the year were met at the timelines that were required. So we were quite comfortable that we did pay back all the monies that were due and payable. We also work very closely with rating agencies, both Moody's and Standard & Poor's. And at the time of us reporting, Chair, we were rated at the levels by Moody's of Ba2 and by S&P at the level of BB-, and we continue to engage with them as they assess the ability of Transnet to fund itself, whether from cash generated internally or working with the capital markets. The last slide on the financials, Chairperson, is about the capital investment, which is an indication of growth in the balance sheet, because from the capital expenditure of about 15.9 billion, the balance sheet grew by the amount that was invested as much as we depreciated. So we can see that there was an element of growth in our assets, but to the points raised by the GCE, there is much more that is required if we are to ensure that the assets are, the infrastructure is up to standard, and also invest for expansion. But this is the minimum that we were able to do in the year that was at 15.9 billion investment. Chairperson, before I move to the next set of slides, I would just also like to confirm, therefore, that this is the financial part of our financials, which is reported in line with the international financial reporting standards. And Transnet did not get a qualification in this regard. There was comfort from the auditors that the statements fairly presented, and we reported in line with the international financial reporting standards. And I will move then to the next section, which is where Transnet had to report a qualified report or a modified report, which is in relation to the PFMA. And in this regard, Chair, what we thought we should do is to give a sense to the committee on a journey that Transnet has been, because if you look at the history and maybe the board having come around 2017, 2018, Transnet comes from a history of clean audits that were not qualified before 2018. And if you look at the numbers, there wasn't significant irregular expenditure that was reported in those years. But as we've moved forward in years 2018 to 2020, and the chairperson referred to the state capture challenges that Transnet has had to contend with, we saw the Auditor General of South Africa coming closer to the SOE and beginning to give stronger guidance on how to deal with PFMA-related matters. We saw National Treasury issuing specific guidelines on in relation to the PFMA and what was required, which then also resulted in stringent PFMA disclosure requirements, and Transnet had to improve and make sure that they comply to these matters. As a result, what we do see is that in the years 2018 to 2019, Transnet began to increase the reporting of irregular expenditure, but does not represent matters that would have occurred in those years, but rather beginning to comply, as I think the DG also mentioned, that it is a requirement that as you identify issues of the past years that you didn't report on, you report in the year that you identify those matters. So we've gone through this journey of 2018 to 2020, but what we then saw in 2021 was us getting closer to National Treasury and beginning to arrest some of the elements, including issues of getting condonation, where we had gone through and reviewed the books and identified areas of transgression, and we're comfortable that we can ask for National Treasury's pardon in terms of those issues. And in the year that was, Chair, we can confirm that one of the matters that the board dealt with from 2018 to 2020 was the application of supplier development, which was a regulation that came through to the state-owned entities in 2011. But on the basis that it was not correctly applied over the years, we had to identify any expenditure relating to these matters and took it to National Treasury, and we got a condonation to the value of about 59 billion rands, which then clears all the contracts that would have anything to do with supplier development. In the second instance, Chair, we also engage National Treasury in relation to some of the legacy expenditure, which we believe should ideally be ring-fenced on the basis of volumes that Transnet would have to contend with. And these matters dating back many, many years back, we got a partial exemption for some of these items to be ring-fenced that are historic, but there is still significant amount of work we need to do to ensure that we deal with the other matters that are yet to be ring-fenced, and that engagement continues, Chair. As my last slide, I just want to show this in numbers, Chairperson, where in the next slide, we show that in 2017, Transnet reported only about 550 million rands in irregular expenditure. But if you move then to 2018 up to 2020, you see significant amount of increase in irregular expenditure being reported to 85 billion, 85.8 billion in the first year, 2018, and growing to 111.5 billion in 2019 and 131 billion in 2020. And again, as I indicated, these are not new expenditure, but it's work that Transnet has put a significant amount of resources and team aside to go back and review contracts and identify any form of irregular expenditure, which then Chairperson has indicated to us that this is quite a big project and cannot be completed in 1 year. And one of the discussions we are driving with the National Treasury is how do we go about ensuring that Transnet is given time and space to basically get to a point where all these matters have been identified and disclosed, but in a very ring-fenced approach. And it does not then delay and derail the process of ensuring that the business performs and we deliver on the strategy. And that discussion is on the go. But also we are looking at improving the control environment, Chairperson, and the automation of the system to improve the identification and the reduction of any occurrence where it needs to be prevented. The last comment I would like to make in this regard, Chair, is that much as we have reported numbers in hundreds of billions in relation to the irregular expenditure, a question gets asked, how much of this irregular expenditure is in relation to the current year and new contracts that were entered into? And we reported, if you look at the 131 billion or the 104 billion of 2021, only 3.9 billion is around the contracts that were in the current year that we've identified as irregular. And if we break down that 3.9 billion, what we notice is it was not a negligent kind of irregular expenditure. A significant part of this irregular expenditure talks to TFR basically going to get security contracts on emergency basis, but on the basis that it may not tick certain bases or boxes as irregular as emergency expenditure, we then had to report it as irregular expenditure. But about over $1 billion of that expenditure was about Transnet Transnet Freight Rail trying to get security contracts in place as quickly as possible to support the need to secure the infrastructure and to improve the movement of goods. And it's a matter we are monitoring very closely and putting controls around it. So, Chairperson, if you look at the Transnet financial statements, they are not qualified in relation to reporting to in line with the international financial reporting standards. The qualification relates to the fact that Transnet has this mountain of work to identify all irregular expenditure and report. And when the auditors looked at the books, it was clear there is some irregular expenditure that had not been identified, not only in relation to the current year, but all the years that needed to be identified. And as such, we then reported a qualified audit report, Chairperson. That is my last slide, and I'll give back to the Chief Executive. Thank you, Chairperson.
Honourable Chair, I don't know if you'd like us to pause at this point, but this is now towards the end, also the subsequent events that you had asked about.
Okay, if that is the end of your presentation, then it means we have to go to all the members so that they engage the report. I hope you are confirming that that's the end of your presentation so far.
No, Chair, can I just go through 3 slides? I think it's about 3, it's not very long, which really closes it, which is the next phase, which is, yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Can you go back? Go forward one. I'll go forward beyond that one, please. No, the next slide, please. Yes, this slide. So, Chair, one of the questions, we then obviously have to report on subsequent events that happened after the end of the financial year. The first one that you asked was the National Port Authority subsidiarization. We are in progress, excuse me, we are in progress with this following the announcement by the President on the 22nd of June this year. We're quite far down the line in terms of ring fencing the assets as was previously done, going through the process of allocating debt so that we create a proper balance sheet. The real challenge here in the end is going to be the fact that the National Ports Act must be amended for this process to not pose a risk for Transnet's balance sheet. As it currently exists, it does pose a risk for Transnet's balance sheet. However, in as far as getting a subsidiary as per the Companies Act, we well along the route of moving in that direction. So we're still in a bit of a difficult situation, and hope that there will be some policy resolution soon. However, the subsidiary being created as per Companies Act, MOIs have been approved, presented to the Department of Public Enterprises, and we continue to work with them. Our biggest issue is that we do not want to have a negative impact at 2 levels. The presumption actually is that the only Transnet's balance sheet will be affected. It has a direct impact on the ability of TNPA also to be able to fund its operations, because the cash, the general cash and the loans come directly from Transnet. So it's really important that we get resolution on in as far as this is concerned. However, as the subsidiary under the Companies Act, we are proceeding and should be done with this. Pepe is at the end of the financial. When exactly should we be finished? Hello, Pepe. Chair, I will continue.
Are you done?
No. I'm not sure. I was trying to get the details of the dates. And then next, as another subsequent event that arose was the unrest in KZN and Gauteng, which happened in July, which had a definite impact on our operations. But fortunately, it being localized in the Gauteng KZN area, we were able to get to full operations within 3 days. There were impacts on our operations directly, and also in terms of just shortages of fuel, food, and essential medical supplies. But fortunately, I think this did not have the greatest impact on us. We have, however, like all other companies in South Africa, applied to SASRIA for putting a claim for SASRIA. So it did definitely have a direct impact on our operations. With regards to the cyber attack, which then happened on the 22nd of July, which basically we received the letter indicating that we had been attacked in the morning. Within a few hours, we had been able to shut down the system. And fortunately, by virtue of the team under Pandalani Munyai being able to act fast, we were able to limit the damage. We didn't lose any data. We didn't pay any amount as a ransom. We did, however, suffer in the sense that for about a month, we shifted to manual operations right across the group, which did definitely reduce the efficiency and the speed with which we were able to move, and also our ability to collect revenue on the one side. Also, it had direct impact actually on the delay in terms of us releasing our financial results, because there's just a period where we were struggling to get together all of the information. But I can say with Chair that we have since returned to normal. There's one system in particular that we decided to discontinue and go out into the market and procure a new system, because we felt it posed a risk without significant benefit for us. On the voluntary service packages, we had a 5.9% uptake, just under 3,000 employees right across the group. We were mostly worried about operators of lifting equipment as well as train drivers. And fortunately, these are located by corridor or by port. Though the numbers were real, the impact has not been significant. And also just crucial that we fast-tracked some of our training and licensing in the organization. But also the arrangement was that if it was a critical skill, we would then have a slower process of releasing that particular individual. And then lastly, we had the fire damage, both in Richards Bay as well as in Maidenwolf, where there were serious fires which led to the damaging, in fact, the collapse of a conveyor belt, our conveyor belt, caused the collapse of South 32's conveyor belt. And for a while, it was definitely touch and go for South 32. We then, as a preemptive action, had to cut down the sulfuric acid pipe and water that delivers to Fosco, so that we'd be able to then fast track the process of remedial action, and also dropping the collapsed conveyor belt without causing additional damage. Look, Chair, Honourable Chair, what we can say, and honourable members, is that these fires have been a definite eye-opener to the extent of neglect of basic operations inside Transnet. I'll give you an example. In Richards Bay, there are 87 conveyor belts. One of the conveyor belts is 4 kilometers long. Now, what we're told is that the conveyor is supposed to have 20 people working on it at any given time, because it helps with making sure that whenever there's spillage, there are people who are able to pick up the spillage, put it back on the conveyor belt, and that we can able to clean the conveyor. But we reduced the numbers from 20 to 8 workers. That would lead to a workaround by the workers. So what happened is that when the fire caught on one part of the conveyor belt, by design, conveyor belts have multiple layers of safety mechanisms. So it should have stopped the conveyor belt operating, but it didn't. In our case, it continued to operate, and that's how the fire spread. Number two, we've had an increased volume and also types of commodities that we use on these conveyor belts. We get fined if there's contamination. So the priority that we made was to clean the conveyor belt after each commodity move. So some commodities are black, some are white, and you have to make sure that there is actually no mixogenation between the two whatsoever. But then, which meant that on the side, you would have tinder effectively, just waiting. If there was a spark, it's built on the fire on the side, there would be quite a big fire that arises. So what that's made us do, if you go into the next slide, please, is agree with the unions to introduce a back to basics program right across Transnet in the ports, and especially in Richards Bay with the conveyor systems, as well as Maiden Wharf, where there was a fire. A basic clean-up program has been undertaken, and there's been significant progress right across the board. What is essential is that it's not just a response to the fire at the time, but rather becomes a standard operating procedure right across the ports. Frankly, also, we need to start re-looking at how we are staffing, in terms of numbers that we have, and also in terms of operational leaders who every day walk at the terminal, make sure that the operations are efficient. We also, the issue of focusing on people, filling of key vacancies, operational vacancies, also very crucial. And then also just the well-being of our own people. This is a basic duty to care, so that maybe they might care a little for us as well. There's improvement in the asset management program that we've spoken about around master service agreements with OEMs, ensuring that we stop, that we use IP parts which are by the OEMs, and to ensure that we retain the warranties. And then there's the whole issue around network renewal, which is we've got to fix the system. Because if we don't fix the system, things break, we have derailments, and we think that that's done by other people and to us. The other issues around just safety, predictability of our operations, and a real focus on security. Next slide, please. Apologies. Thank you very much, Chair. That's it from our side.
Chair, you are muted.
Yeah, I was trying. There was a disturbance in my gadget. Thank you so much, CEO and your team, for such a comprehensive, long presentation. I hope the members have dotted their questions of clarity, their comments, and everything. I will give them an opportunity now to engage in the presentation. I hope you will also be ready to note those questions so that you can be in a position to respond as you presented this long and comprehensive input, which provokes a lot of question, obviously. among members of parliament. Honorable members, that is the presentation by the CEO, by the board chair. Let's begin shooting, not literally. I will start with the Honorable Dlamini, as followed by, of course, Honorable Kachalia. Yes, can we go accordingly?
Thanks, Chair. Good morning, colleagues. May I not switch on my video because I have connectivity problems here, but I have been following discussions. I think in the main, I want to start with the issue that was raised by the CEO in her closing remarks in terms of the personnel that was supposed to be, the number of people that was supposed to be mending the conveyor belt and the subsequent fires. And maybe look at the factors that may have contributed to that in terms of how the money has flown from government to Transnet in terms of budgets. And I know the decision not to pump money to these SOEs anymore is there, but these are some of the consequences of such decisions. I'm also aware that as Honorable Kachala is going to speak after me, he's going to paint a picture that all is bad at Transnet. But having looked at the financials that were presented to us, it's not all divisions that are making a loss. I would take Transnet Engineering and TPT, for instance. Those are the divisions that seem to be not doing well. But with TPT, understanding that they are dealing with pipelines which transport gas and fuel mostly, and other commodities, I think this issue of security is going to be a factor to a certain extent in terms of securing the pipeline itself, because people tend to use trucks more now, maybe because our pipelines are not as safe as they ought to be. Now we are, from what we've been presented, we tend to use private security companies more often than not. Maybe it's time we revisited the old arrangement of having a dedicated police that would look after our rail and pipelines, because Transnet is going to tell us very soon that subcontractors are sometimes found to be the ones stealing cables and railway lines because they want to extend their contracts. Well, it would make sense because the basic principle of business, for you to thrive as a business, you must create demand. So maybe we need to take that responsibility and house it at Transnet internally so that we minimize some of these things, if that's going to be possible. Two, the safety at our ports. There's one incident that I'm not too sure if it's related to Transnet or not, but the discovery of the container at Mobeni, it had arms and ammunition. One would assume that container came through the Durban port. And when the looting happened, the people ended up getting hold of that container, and as such, we have more guns and ammunition now in the townships that are not registered and accounted for because they were stolen. Maybe it speaks to also the sensitivity with which we deal with, we treat the things that would generally pose a security risk to both Transnet and the country, because these arms and ammunition were imported, but they never really reached their destination. They were in a warehouse, housed there, looting happened, and they landed in wrong hands. One would have hoped that the people who import these things take better care to ensure that they don't land in wrong hands. There shouldn't be a delay in terms of your arms getting to South Africa and you keep them in a warehouse. That's why everyone is required to have an armory, for instance. It's such things. And maybe we need to also take reasonable steps as a country to follow up on the owners of the container, to look at what measures that they take to protect such a sensitive arsenal. On the whole, colleagues, I think Transnet is on a road to recovery. Things will get better as soon as we expand the port of Durban as the gateway to Africa. And if we are able to do that, we are going to be able then to stimulate job creation from both local auxiliary industries and the vessels that would bring cargo for the continent and sub-Saharan Africa to the port of Durban. The rail issue is still a bit of a mystery, because as we heard, colleagues, from the budget statement that was delivered in Parliament, there seems to be a move to allow the private sector to take over our rail network. As to how and the modalities of that, we are yet to be told, but it seems to be something in the pipeline. We'll keep a closer eye on that and see how it helps our country and Transnet improve on efficiency and expand the business of Transnet. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you so much, Honorable Dlamini. Honorable Kachalia.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, just before I begin, in reference to the Honorable Dlamini's reference to me, I think that was out of place and not necessarily constructive. I hope he'll listen to my questions and my comments. They will be presented, as always, in the spirit of responsible oversight, in a constructive manner, to ensure that something and utilities and companies that are of particular importance to our country economy are effectively and well answered and posed. That said, at a high level, let me pose some questions and comments at a high level first, and then I'll move on to the specific questions that emanate from the presentation. So in the previous financial year, revenue increased by 1.3% to 75.1 billion, and net profit was 33.9 billion. Cash generated from operations increased by 2.1% to 35 billion. Operating costs also increased, and EBITDA increased by 0.7% to 34 billion. That was in the previous year. Now Transnet has recorded its first annual loss for more than a decade, as revenues have plummeted in what has been described as a trying financial year, and the company posted, as we know, an 8.4 billion loss, down from 2.9 billion profit previously, marking the first loss certainly in 10 years, and revenue was down 10.5%. In the previous annual report, the global economy was expected and cited as such to remain subdued, and the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic resulting in a slowing of demand was foreseen and documented. Challenges were identified then, and a new strategic outlook with a renewed emphasis on the well-being of people, safety, customer service, asset utilization, and cost control. The company was supposedly well positioned to become an agile and trustworthy freight transport and logistics partner, but this hasn't happened. Now we have seen the headline news of the plan that's contained in the presentation. And while there is some operational detail, for which I thank the presenters, there is not sufficient explanation of how this will be achieved against downgrades to junk of your investment paper, procurement protocols that foster inefficiencies and inflated costs, loss of advantage to road in terms of volume, efficiencies and technology and the adjacencies beyond your control, for example, economic stagnation, zero effective capacity of safety and security apparatus to stem theft and vandalism. Also, and this is important because it was mentioned, the revenue loss and impairments referred to by way of explanation for the 8.4 billion loss reported, taken against the previous year's profit of 3.9 billion, plus the loss incurred this year, would still result in a significant, if lesser loss, and certainly in the billions. So that's the high level. Now, with response to specifically to the presentation, let's look at revenue. And in this regard, is the decrease in revenues due to volume or due to price? Assuming the impact of COVID and reduced economic activity, it is probably volumes which went down. If volumes went down, shouldn't also operating activities come down and thus also costs? How come operating expenses increased by more than 10% after inflation while revenues decreased by 10%? In terms of the qualified audit, look, we understand that the PFMA and related or similar regulations place very difficult conditions on the operating environment and that many qualifications are recorded because of formalities also in the auditing process. Often these qualifications are as a result of strenuous definitions and are not related to substance of the business. Can you help us understand what the case is here? Are there any qualifications which you as leadership of the operating business regard as a threat or a concern for the business and its integrity? Now, further question, if Transnet is the integrated logistics chain support business, why does it not have a trucking fleet to complement it, for example, rail infrastructure? Do you view investment into infrastructure as an integrated decision across the three value chains of pipelines, ports, and rail, or are these decisions made on an independent standalone basis? To what extent are or should the three value chains be managed separately and independently? What is the rationale that keeps all these three verticals under the same management? And to what extent will you allow the private sector to invest or co-invest? Now, with regard to freight rail, please define what you mean by rail friendly. What kind of freight do you classify as suitable for rail versus roads? Road. Already about 10 years ago, the demand-led strategy was implemented, which is referred to. That was to no success, it seems. What can you tell us has changed? With regard to engineering, how many employees are within Transnet Engineering, and how will this workforce be reduced or redeployed if you don't have work for them? Now let's talk about Transnet port terminals. How many container moves are you achieving, and how does this compare to best practice? To what extent is the total available terminal space for containers? And what is the average duration of a container in the port? What percentage of containers that go in and out of South Africa is being transported on rail versus road? The TNPA is the authority, yeah? It provides the license. Similar to ICASA providing the license to telco operators or NERSA providing a license for Eskom. Yet you ascribe volumes moved by this authority. This sounds odd. Why would you discuss the authority as if it were an operational unit? Is this simply a mistake in the narrative, or is it an actually true that the TPNA is viewed as an operator? If so, where's the borderline to TPT? And insofar that borderline is vague or maybe ill-defined, this may also be a reason for substandard performance, no? How do you think about the 7 or 8 ports in this country? Are they being managed as if they were one unit? Are you optimized and led by the center, or are they being managed on a one-by-one basis, set up in competition with each other? What is international best practice to achieve high-performing ports in this regard? You moved As regards property, you moved from the Carlton Centre to Waterfall, citing, amongst other, safety reasons. Now you're moving back to the Carlton Centre. What is the rationale, and have the safety aspects been attended to? And what is the cost of moving? How big is, in terms of personnel costs, how big is the head office payroll in terms of cost and numbers? What is the total consulting group spend per annum? And given the context of large monopolies being split into constituent parts to save group costs and drive efficiencies, rail, ports, and pipelines do not have managerial overlaps. So why not split these? Where internationally today, can you tell me, does any company in this area manage all these under one entity? You must know, and I'm sure you do, that Canada Pacific and Canada Rail replaced the management of a team that they had by people with deep railway expertise and track records. They reduced the operating ratio from above 80% to below 60%. So are you employing people like this, or are you continuing with deployment? If so, why aren't you following the Hunter Harrison example, which I'm sure you're aware of, at all levels, top to bottom? Now, in conclusion, growth is a key metric in all your strategies, but you're not a listed company. You need to fix efficiencies and not necessarily drive bottom line growth for your shareholder. You need to deliver public goods, and you need to do so efficiently. So why not focus on that instead? Growth requires money in any event, and that you don't have. So 3 final riders. What are the logistic costs as a percentage of transportable GDP? By that I mean, for example, services don't need transport, so transportable GDP. This is what Transnet should be measured on. It will help disaggregate the relative advantages of road versus rail, for example. Then, what is your net promoter score, NPS? What is your target? What is it now? Are you still measuring it? And if not, why not? And what is TFR's operating ratio, which shows the efficiency of a company, of a company's management by comparing the total operating expense of a company to net sales? What is the trend, and how does this compare to benchmarks? Thank you. I will send these questions to the CEO by email for ease of answering and reference as a memoir. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Kachalia. Is Honorable Maotwe?
Thank you very much, Chair. Chair, it took Transnet the whole 2 hours to present, and now we're left with very few minutes. I don't think we're going to get concrete answers from here, but I'll nonetheless ask the questions. Now, we sit here today, and Transnet is presenting to us a revenue loss of 10.5%, a net loss of 8.4 billion rands from the profit of 2.9 that they recorded last year. We sit here and we've got an EBITDA that went down by a whopping 42.8%. Now, that tells you that the strategy that they've been embarking on, it's clearly not working. Isn't it time that Transnet goes back to looking at revenue outside the SADC region? I mean, there were projects that were identified in the past in Ghana, in Nigeria, in Senegal. Isn't it time that these projects get revisited now? Because clearly now there seems to be some sort of motivation or interest since the last time the GCE hosted the president of Ghana. Perhaps this is a time that now Transnet needs to look at revenues beyond the SADC region. The second question, Chair, is the Transnet Strategy 4.0 was approved in 2017 and emphasized on efficiency in operations as well as growth, led from logistics opportunities from outside, as well as leeching on the opportunities created by the fourth industrial revolution. Why was it abandoned? Because now we're told of efficiency in the Durban ports, something that could have been addressed by the Transnet Strategy 4.0, which was duly approved by the board. The third question is, Transnet recently lost a case against Newland, where Transnet claimed that Mr. Siyabonga Gama signed the contract fraudulently, unlawfully, and was therefore the contract being illegal. Now, the judge dismissed all that and said that this case is a revisionist, it's unconvincing, and it's false. Now the question is, how many more revolutionary contracts like this have not been implemented because of this type of petty suspicions and investigations? Does the management not believe that what prevents the company from moving forward is the culture of fear and indecisiveness that has been brought into the company since 2018? With regards to the voluntary severance package, Chair, why were they indiscriminate and everyone who applied basically given a package without due regard for the skills requirements of the organization going forward? Does the executive know what skills are required for the entity to succeed in the future? I mean, the GCE was telling us about repair and growth. How are you repairing and growing the organization when you are letting go of the skills that previously were there in Transnet, that previously with those skills, Transnet managed to record high levels of profit and high levels of EBITDA? Today we sit here, a loss of from 2.8 to 8.4 billion rand, and you've just let go of the same people that used to make Transnet to be profitable. How are you going to move this entity forward? And Chair, my last point is, I mean, if you look at just the very first slide that the GCE presented, the container business, you've got lots of containers, but what gets into the port is far much more than what went through the rail. So basically your road to rail strategy is not working, because how come you've got more containers in the ports? How did they arrive at the ports? It means they arrived through road and not through rail. So why are you not leveraging on that to say, let's bring all these containers back to rail? For us, that's a low-hanging fruit. Those are the things that you need to leverage on to put the profitability of the organization forward. But Chair, finally, I've got no trust in the GCE. I've got no trust in the chairperson of the board. They've just shown us that they don't have any capacity to run this entity. They must actually resign, because for the first time, Transnet has recorded such a huge loss. It should be an embarrassment to both the chair and the GCE. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Mawoto. Honorable Piri.
Thanks, Chair, and let me forward my greetings to the chairperson of the board and management or executive that are present in the platform, and greetings to my colleagues. I won't be long, as it's fortunate for me to also have a bite, because I'm inside the bus, Chair. I'm in the village. I'm going to, our buses are leaving now. But let me just go quickly to have a bite and say, I want to appreciate, the long presentation, even though it took 2 hours, Chair. It was very fruitful, informative. I want to applaud Womanda, a woman. I believe you said it's Portia. She made a presentation that is, you feel the understanding. I feel, or we must say it and praise it, when a person understands the organization and she's not found wanting. The way she presented, she even made us not to be hard at thinking, because she could explain the reasons, and therefore I want to say bravo to the presenters. They did a very wonderful job. It shows they understand the environment that they are working in. At the same breath, Chair, my question, I want to focus it firstly on the gender balance, or female representation in the entity, to say you are still a bit far from the 50% that some of us we are anticipating, or the government has said. Then I want to say, or question to the chairperson of the board, in making sure in the executives and in the entire entity, how are you going to deal, or what is the strategy to make sure you attract more women with brains, the way we have seen the presenters doing well? And at the same time, we are also witnessing through your report the imbalances of persons with disabilities that are in the institution. You are not, they are not represented well. as much as you are saying you had your own target of 3.1, but you are at 2.2, which it's a worrying factor. I've got personally interest of persons with disability to be part or to be employed and show their capacity, as well as women. So my one question, that will be two, because it's people with a disability and at the same time with women. Chair, as I proceed to the issue of Transnet property, you know, it's a worrying factor that we have seen or we are witnessing as an entity. The new revenue decrease marginally from 1.1 billion in 2020 to 1 billion in 2021. So, you know, my question is that the operational expenditure increased from 768 million in 2020 to 778 million in 2021. And as much as we are observing this, what is the main strategy for the executive and the board to cap such a decrease that we are observing in the entity? As I move forward, I don't have a lot of them, but also I've got interest in their finances in terms of the AG's report. We are observing, or there are other aspects that they are not doing well, but then when they presented, it shows that they are following it up, but it keeps on coming back to say they've got queries or findings that they are not complying with in terms of legislation, and they are highlighted in their report. So can they give us, you know, a trust and their consequence management in terms of what are they doing, if ever it's the issue of human negligence, if it's the issue of themselves even not managing their finances. Let me pause the chair, because I am about to get to the buzz, and I believe it won't be very well for me to interact while I'm in the buzz. I can't say everybody must keep quiet so that I must interact with yourself. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Piri. Honorable Mkwanaze was having a problem. Is she in a position to speak now? Obviously not. Okay. Honorable Clark.
Thank you, Chairperson. I do apologize for the background noise. They're busy cutting the grass here in the park on the other side. Number one, Chairperson, I would like to know how many locomotives has Transnet got in their stock that cannot be repaired? What steps have been taken in order to address the repairs and services aspect in relation to these locomotives due to the suspension of the 1064 OEM contract? What is the progress in terms of the 1064 locomotive tender in terms of fraud and corruption? And how many officials have been found guilty, and what is the status quo of those officials in terms of the financial value outcomes, and will these officials be made to pay this funding back? Then, due to the inefficiency of rail network and companies that have shifted their goods from rail to road, what is Transnet doing to make rail network safe and attractive? And how will it make rail transport competitive within the market again? What is the entity doing to secure its railway network, which has been affected by vandalism and theft? And what are the financial losses due to this? And I'm not just speaking about the rail network, but in many cases, if you go onto any site where there are buildings for local stations, those have been plundered to the ground. I mean, I just take in Katlehong, I visited a railway station about 2 months ago, and I mean, a fairly new building it was before, and there's absolutely nothing left of that building, and it's very sad to see that. What has Transnet done dealing with continued breakdowns and the upgrade of current aging infrastructure? Has Transnet got the necessary funds for the upgrading of aging infrastructure, and over what period will this be addressed, and what would be the estimated cost thereof? How will Transnet deal with the continued fuel theft that occurs on a regular basis, and how many cases of such fuel theft have been opened? Has these cases been successfully prosecuted? And what does these incidents amount to in terms of financial losses? Then in terms of irregular, fruitless and wasteful expenditure, it has been highlighted by the AG for the past 6 years on his report. I mean, what consequence management has been instituted against the perpetrators of irregular expenditure and fruitless and wasteful expenditure? Can I request that a report come to the committee in terms of this aspect so that we have a detailed breakdown? What corrective measures have been put in place to address shortcomings within internal controls, and what are those internal controls that they're going to use to make to deplete their wasteful and fruitless expenditure? What training and support is given to enable the executive and staff to correct this and to execute their duties responsibly? Then, Chair, if I could just ask, you know, in the report they spoke about procurement through the middle person, and this practice needs to come to an end. I mean, if you use a middle person when you procure a tender, I mean, surely this is not in line with what the PFMA prescribes with. What is the financial impact in terms of this practice? You know, surely if you do this, you're sort of double dipping and the expenses becomes double as well. And what consequence management has been put in place to eradicate this practice? Then also just for clarity, are there vaccine sites within Transnet sites, and how successful are those being used? What will Transnet do to rehabilitate? I've already asked that, sorry. Has there been a benchmark in terms of hijacking on rail networks in terms of coaches versus road transport at all? It will be interesting to see how many of our trains are being hijacked versus truck transport. They also speak about Mozambique manufacturing 300 high-side wagons for us at the cost of 360 million rand. And I would like to know, is there a maintenance program included with this project? And has South Africa not got the capacity to manufacture these wagons to lower the costs? And then the report also speaks that the target of increased rail utilization at the Port of Durban would be from 1 train every 2 weeks to 4 trains per week. I would really like to see a progress report to see whether those targets are kept to and that they are realized. And then how many buildings do Transnet lease, and at what cost factor? How many buildings do they own? And of those buildings, how many are utilized? And then also in terms of the presentation, there was a point made that, and I would like this to be clarified. It says skilled cadre Black employees, 14,606. You know, when I hear skilled cadre, I would like to know, does that mean that you need to be an ANC card-carrying member to qualify for these jobs? Because there's been a huge discussion in Parliament with the President around cadre deployment. And then the net loss that amounts to 8.4 billion, what does this equate to in terms of the following: fraud and corruption, fruitless and wasteful expenditure, and loss control. Then can you also advise me if Transnet is 100% tax compliant? And then there was a whole slide in terms of Transnet's deep dives and what they want to, in terms of their targets and what they want to realize, Chair. I would like to put in a recommendation that that particular slide and all the aspects on that slide, that we get a quarterly report to see how Transnet is actually doing in terms of what they want to do to turn Transnet around, because I think it's very important that we exercise oversight around that to see whether things are improving within Transnet. Thank you, Chair. That's it.
Thank you, Honorable Clerk. Before I give to Honorable Gumede, I think I can answer the question in relation to whether there are jobs that are preserved for the ANC in Transnet. That one is a leader of the ANC. I can answer that. I don't need to wait for Transnet to respond to that question. There is no job in the country, in any public entity, that is preserved for ANC members. And two, cadre deployment has nothing to do with membership of the ANC. Thank you. Honorable Kumeda.
Good afternoon, Chair, and all colleagues, to the DPE Transnet under the leadership of CEO, the Chair of the Board, and all other members present on the platform. Chair, I wish to say that the presentation has been or is well presented. Thank you very much for the presenters to have shown a thorough insight into the organization and the understanding of all the complexities that are within perhaps the organization. It was a kind of a fully packed presentation. Let's accept and acknowledge that anyone who would have listened very much carefully will understand that there are a lot of follow-ups that may be required. It concurs, Chair, to your comment when you made your preamble, that it looks as if we need to meet quite too frequent with Transnet, because the longer we leave it, the more distorted, perhaps undistorted questions we may find ourselves having to ask them, which in fact it's not doing any good to the organization. Chair, I must say that Transnet is one of that organization that by any chance, as the committee, we can't lose it. Any effort is required that it be assisted. In the words of the chair of the board, it's one of those things, as much as he was referring to crime, but helping, supporting Transnet, we definitely need that kind of collective wisdom, because it cannot be driven by Transnet alone. DPE is there, we must be there, improve on our oversight, improve as well the frequency of meetings so that we don't find ourselves having to have a very large gap between us in such a way that we'll then come here and ask perhaps questions that in fact may not be relevant. But Chair, I must say, as a chair, at times, there are members of this perhaps committee who are very angry. It would be good that at times we find out why people are so angry. You know, you go to the extent of saying people must resign and what. It's not about that. I think everyone has signed a contract, and if there is any kind of poor performance that is not to the qualification or basis of the employment, I think those that in fact employed her or employed any other person, we will then follow the procedures correctly. Let me remind this House, I want to say on the 20th of February, if I'm not mistaken, I think I'm very accurate here, 2020, the CEO was employed. So if we are correct, it's only this financial year ending, which in fact has it's her kind of responsibility, if we can say that. But as a person who is taking over, we will understand that all other things that happened previously, they will then be lumped to the CEO who would have been employed at the time. I'm making this so that people understand. This is the second time that the CEO has done the presentation. The first presentation that she gave us, that was excellent. All of us were happy that, yes, we have done a good thing. This is the second one then. You understand, as well as I can't rule out Nonkulego, and her performance as well was very good. I think she answered some of the questions that I, in fact, wanted to ask, but it doesn't stop me from asking other questions. Chair, if I may go into the questions. I'm happy that the chair of the board did touch on the state capture. I'm not sure. I want to find out from the chair. In terms of the remnants or the elements of the state capture, in his assessment, how much are still remaining inside? Because that's quite too critical. He as well touched on procurement issues. I think I was much more interested on procurement issues because I want to believe that's the one that has given us a qualified statement. How do we appoint contractors that do not qualify? You know, it's I don't know. I'm not sure of a middle person that's doing whatever that's being done. But in terms of procurement, you cannot take a person who, in fact, did not make the grade in terms of pricing, or it could be any other things. But in this sense, there were those contractors that in fact were taken on board, which did not get the required scoring, as well as their pricing exceeded the tender price. In terms of PMFA, as well as procurement procedures, that in fact it's incorrect. I'm happy. I'm as well happy, Chair, because I understand that it's a kind of a projection. The CEO says to us, for her, the 22-23 is the year that she will be on the hilltop. But I want to say, if I want to help her, that she must have swept the entity clean. Get out all those elements that in fact will drag your name down. Work on those remaining elements of state capture, then you'll get to the hilltop. Because I've got no doubt that you know your work, you know the entity, everything, it's fine. It's only that you may not have mastered some other corners because people, you found them there and they are doing their own things within perhaps the department. The CEO as well mentioned, you know, she expressed a concern on the pandemic. With this, especially the eve of new variant, how much are we prepared? Are we ready to receive that? In fact, we should have given condolences to those, the families of the 155 members that in fact were lost, who were in the employ of Transnet. Chair, the CEO as well mentioned that there are weak assets like agriculture as well as property. What mechanism, what do they have in place to boost them? Because that's much more important. You know, I heard as well our colleague mentioning especially the area of properties. That's too serious. The debate yesterday was about those properties before they can sort of be taken away from Transnet through the custodianship. We must make sure that it's being used and it's used appropriately. The other question that I have is, because it's perhaps I'm failing to interpret it, what is the impact of receiving waiver on your debt? Because these are some of the things that are saying when you received your qualification, in fact, you were going to receive a waiver. What in fact is the meaning of all that? The explanation by Nonkululeko, I think I'm very happy with her explanation, because I was saying, if some people can explain some of the concerns we have, what made the department or the entity fail to explain those things to the Auditor General? Because that in fact was too critical for, I don't know how it is done, but it was too critical for the AG to understand, to get your input and the interpretation in the whole thing. Perhaps going towards the end is a situation that says for 4 years, which I think it includes this, we've been receiving a qualified report. What makes, in fact, Transnet to fail to implement matters that are raised by the Auditor General? Because that's too critical. In fact, failing to implement that, it's a recipe for another qualification in the following year. That will be much more important that those things then be done and be attended to. Perhaps on the side of the CEO, what strategies do they have now? Because we can see that it becomes, since the 4 years, all matters that have been raised by the Auditor General have not been implemented. So this time around, we want to ask a question that in your kitty, what strategies do you have that this time around, all those matters that in fact were raised by the AG are attended to, so that at the end of the day, all of us were happy and we are getting a clean audit. Thank you, Chair. I'll wait there for today.
Thank you, Honorable Gumede. We are moving to Honorable Buthelezi.
Chair,
Yes.
I hope you did not forget me.
Who is me?
It's Honorable Komani.
Oh, I didn't see you. I did take you actually. I don't know why I could not pick you up at all. Okay. You will come in after Honorable Buthelezi.
Thank you very much.
Honorable Buthelezi. Oh, seemingly Honorable Buthelezi is not here. Come, Honorable Komani.
Very much. Thank you very much, Chair. I think I'm tempted, Chair, to say this statement. As members of this committee, we should not make a mistake of confusing concerns to anger. That was my statement. Anyway, thank you very much, Chair, for the presentation by Transnet, and I greet all the members of the Portfolio Committee and everyone in the meeting. Chair, I've got a few questions. Let me just start by saying, number one, how many locomotives are parked on the coal line, and when will the maintenance contract with the CRCC be finalized? What volume levels will be achieved in the coal line this year, and what drives this? I'm asking this question, Chair, being cautious of the fact that I know that Transnet would cite the cable theft as one of the factors, but maybe one is raising this question with the clear mind that that might be a part of the response. Number two, Chairperson, what is the nature of the collaboration with the private sector on security matters on the coal line? Is it true that security in Transnet freight rails is now run by a private company? If so, was the process followed to identify this company, and what are the pertinent details for this engagement with such a company? The value of the contract, how much is paid monthly, and what are the performance requirements from such a company? Number three, Chair, the top layer of management at Transnet is all new. If you can just look at it. What logistics expertise do the current leadership have? From which logistic cooperative entities, and how is it useful in providing the critical direction that Transnet requires at this time? Why does it appear that most of the executive are former government employees who either worked at the DPE when the group the GCE was a DG at DPE, or are they regulatory experts from the DOT? Number four, Chair, what is Transnet's international strategic direction and mandate nowadays? Is it true that the mandate is reduced to only projects in the SADC region? If SADC is an area of focus, Why was the Zimbabwe project cancelled, which would have enabled Transnet Engineering to export rolling stock to Zimbabwe? The final question, Chair. The President of Kenya was given a tour of TE facilities and they are outside of SADC. Is this another change of strategy and direction and a realization that growth can only come from collaboration with other African states? Thank you very much for now.
Thank you, Honorable Komani. Now we coming to Honorable Malinga.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Greetings to yourself. I'm not sure if I'm audible, Chair. I'm suffering from what Honorable Piri is suffering from. I'm on the bus from the village to the precinct. Let me also greet the colleagues on the platform and Transnet and our support staff, Chair. Chairperson, let me also welcome the presentation by Transnet and start where Honorable Gumede left off with the AG's findings, that it can't be correct that the AG will be finding for that Transnet is not attending to. Can we get a plan on
Honorable
when
Malinga.
and how they are going to?
Honorable Malinga.
Yes, Chair. Yes,
I
Chair.
think you have to restart. You have been cutting.
Oh, okay.
You were
Chair.
starting about the Auditor General. Just start there.
Okay, Chair. I'm asking how will Transnet deal with the issues that were raised by the Auditor General for the past 4 years? If we can get a plan on that one, Chair. Two, Chairperson, the issue of them giving contracts to people who do not make the grade. What are the consequence management? What is the consequence management for the people who have done that? Has anybody been suspended or is there any money recouped for those contracts, Chair? Chairperson, let me also ask the issue of the security of our pipelines. What is their mitigation strategy to ensure that our pipelines are secured? And Chairperson, how far is the process of changing the copper wires that we were told when we went on oversight to put the new ones that cannot be sold to the scrap metals? How far are they with that project? Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Malinga. Thank you, Honorable Malinga. Can we go to our last person, Honorable Shabalala?
Thank you so much, Chair, and greetings to everybody in the meeting. Indeed, the 2-hour presentation might not be really feasible at times, but I want to appreciate the presentation itself because it shows that the colleagues went to town to ensure that we have much information. I think for the sake of managing of time, we might want colleagues, when they've given us presentation, to limit just the oration of the presentation itself. Look, Chair, for myself, really the question becomes what we call the third bullet is very problematic for me on the National Ports Authority subsidization. If you take it, it means the implementation, they implemented before they could perform due diligence and economic assessment. Look at that slide on the National Ports Authority subsidization and look at the third bullet. And I think that it needs to be corrected, colleagues, if you were. Look, you've got, I mean, you have 4, what do you call them? Like you have qualified audit over time. The point on the AG and what we do with the recommendations for me is very important, and we can not overstress the matter of consequence management. Now, I want to know what progress has Transnet made in terms of implementing the pipeline security strategy. to limit fuel theft that was responsible for the lion's share of Transnet Pipeline's net operating expenses and the negative impact on the road to rail strategy. We saw road gaining market share. And I think that that policy around moving from road to rail is quite important. Perhaps at a point of political, at the executive level, we need to get an understanding how far is the discussions around that with the Minister of Transport. I think it's very critical. And as this committee must receive a report thereof. Now, has Transnet developed any remedial action to fast track the environmental remediation backlog to comply with relevant and applicable environmental legislation while maintaining organizational sustainability? I'm asking this question because Transnet Pipeline's operating expenses were huge, partly because of environmental remediation and rehabilitation costs. Another question becomes, what measures does Transnet have in place, A, to nurse the automotive back to life as the worst affected business segment within Transnet port terminals in light of the uncompetitive tariffs for automotive, and B, manufacture design wagons to match the dynamically changing automotive model requirements. I'm asking also this question because the auto manufacturing industry employs around 120,000 and accounts for 14% of the total South African exports. And another question is that how far is Transnet in terms of responding to poor contract management in light of contract irregularities regarding the 1064 original equipment manufacturer contract? Another question, when will Transnet Engineering supply the remaining balance of 185 of 300 wagons secured by the CFM Mozambique to increase its external revenue? Another question, what consequence management has been instituted against the perpetrators of irregular expenditure and fruitless and wasteful expenditure? And I want to align that question when it comes to the issue of the under expenditure. I think under expenditure is a problem, Chairperson, and I think the colleagues within the procurement process, if not the CFO, CEO, they need to really tell us the under expenditure. What are you doing about this under expenditure, and how much money is going back to Treasury? Because colleagues, we cannot continuously come to committees and approve budget and you underspend on those budget while we need so much money, whether it was COVID-19, and we hear you, but if that's the case, you need to tell us what is going to be done and how we're going to spend that money in this remainder of this financial year. And you know, Transnet recorded a loss of 8.4 billion in the year ended 31st March 2021. They are far from underspending. And what is disappointing to me is that Transnet spends so much revenue on paying workers instead of investigating in key areas that sustains the entity, like maintenance and expansion of operations. Know that I'm not saying that we must not spend in paying colleagues. We need to employ, because you would have even underspent when it comes to that money, when it comes to compensation. And I have a problem with that. Lastly, Chair, you know, there are areas where Transnet has its own properties, and you would have PRASA that becomes the people that will operate in those properties. For instance, I'll give an example on Boysens in Johannesburg. I'm sure you will know that property. I did make an issue about it and I did raise it to yourself. Till today, we've not found a solution. We have what we call Zamazamas, people, illegal miners under those property where PRASA would have its railway. However, it's your property. And we have seen lots of death, abuse of women and children in those things. We've tried to involve even the policing. The policing is always there, but they're unable to deal and curb this violence that we're seeing. And those people of Zamazamas, they really erect, or rather they do an infrastructure underground. What is that we're doing? Because we cannot continuously have this property that we own to Transnet, where Transnet will even lease from yourself, the same state-owned entities, and they owe you so much money. And I would like to hear the board chairperson reporting to myself right now or to the committee to say how much does PRASA owe to yourself, so that we are able to gauge these things of entities budget, if not money, not evolving around, rather going outside, and we owe each other. But while we're supposed to try to find a way how we can really operate and work with each other, within each other. The last point, Chair, you know, that I think you've responded the cadre deployment, and you know, it's unfortunate because these are officials, that these are public servants who are qualified, who are employed within the value chain. And it's unfortunate that we come here, we want to perpetuate that all of them or many employees have cadre deployment and so forth. It casts aspersions on men and women here in Transnet, who are doing what they can do, who are doing the most to ensure that we guard and we continue with this locomotive industry. We make it to such that it's productive for South African citizens. But every time we come and we're telling them, we're pushing them almost as if we're playing a political ball game with them. I really think, as honorable members, it's really unfortunate. Yes, you can ask the president, you can go to parliament, make noise about that, but it cannot be that it comes out on this committee almost as if it's the truth, that at the end of the day, everybody who's employed is cadre deployed. It's wrong, colleagues. We really need to evaluate ourselves and how we interact with officials, because they too are men and women who are qualified, who went to school to study for this industry, for them to work here. I mean, Portia is a woman who really drives this discourse and shows that she reports every time. And you want to tell us and sit and say, no, everybody here is cadre deployed. We don't have membership of everybody. In South Africa, everybody's got the right to vote for whoever that they want. So it cannot be that at the end of the day, as other political parties, we come here, we always point fingers at them, because we will tell you different stories on cadre deployment, Cape Town and everywhere else. But it cannot be correct that we leave it as such and we don't attend to this assertions that we keep on making. They're really unfortunate. But let me thank the Transnet and the board, even the board chairperson, including our minister, for really providing the services, if not the support, with the DG being involved in this meeting. Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you so much, Honorable Shabalala. You have even covered me. As a result, I'm not gonna be some of the issues that came in here, which are not necessarily progressive, so to speak. Just to be critical about the report, I think whilst one should appreciate the comprehensive nature of this presentation, CEO and the chairperson of the board. However, I think my critique of the report is that it's more focused on operational performance. Of course, it's important, but it falls short to provide us with a sense of strategic direction. And I hope next time when we meet at this level, whether it's not going to be about this annual report or other matters, or Transnet will have to assist us with the strategic direction of the business. For example, the issue around the National Port Authority, which Honorable Shabalala made a very good point about, this subsidiarization. If it's gonna have negative impact on Transnet financial statement, then it means something has to be done by Transnet in order to minimize that impact on Transnet. I think we still need, I know for a fact that in your slides, there was something that was referring to the fact that there is a work in progress to deal with those facts. But I think I anticipated, without having get that that move is gonna impact very heavy on Transnet. And I think I will be getting those kind of details, but if there is some process to detect and get exactly what is the impact will be, it will be helpful for us as a committee. Because we don't want to find Transnet in the same position of TINEL, in the same position of SAA and other entities that are in ICU or already wakened from the dead. We don't want that to happen in Transnet. Transnet is very big for us to lose or including to weaken it. Therefore, any form of a threat to the developmental agenda of ESCOM, of Transnet, it needs to be put in front of all of us so that we can be in a position to engage and assist this process. Also, I think Transnet should consider embarking on diversification and use its capacity to enlarge its scope. And I'm saying this because in our oversight, chairperson of the board, in our oversight at Transnet, we're exposed to a massive infrastructure at Transnet that we never thought is there previously. And that make us to have higher hopes on the future of Transnet and its centrality to this economy that is in crisis in our country. As we talk now, we are sitting at 42% of unemployment, and Transnet to me has a potential to contribute substantially to reduce that 42. Challenges such as the theft of cables, vandalism by private interest, I'm emphasizing that because I know for a fact that the problems that we have at the ESCOM of fire and undermining the good work that has been already done to build those power stations there is now undermined by private interest, by the companies that were procured to build those. Who doesn't want to leave that entity? Who still want to continue accumulating there at all costs, you know? I think even some of the vandalization that taking place at Transnet is also possible be the private interest, you know, and we can prevent that by massive employment of our people at a reasonable basic wage, just to relieve them to have food on their table, CEO and the chairperson. We need to find a way of contributing. You know, the problem of the private companies, they don't have the same responsibility that we have as a state. They don't have a responsibility to pay free education, to pay social grant, to build for poor people houses, which we do have. Therefore, to me, rather than continuing empowering people who are not thankful, it is better to employ our people direct. Some of the things don't need procurement. They just need projects like your peer, like the PWPs that we have at the government level. You can do that as a Transnet, just to have people doing that and protecting the infrastructure that is there. And a mechanism is needed. I know Transnet is playing a very, 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 very great role in terms of building Black economic empowerment in the country. And I don't see any other entity that is contributing to build black economy, black business than Transnet. You know, I still want to know which other entity that has have a massive impact in terms of transforming our economy than Transnet. Therefore, on those bases, we need, while we are doing that, but not do that at the detriment of the bigger agenda of our country. That's my comment. It's just comment. I'm not asking any question because my colleagues have asked a lot of questions. But I know for a fact that while my colleagues have an avalanche of questions, a long list of questions, some of us, we are being persuaded to raise these questions by business interests, by the way. I know for a fact myself, I'm always contacted some by business interests complaining about this and that. Therefore, all of us, we are engaged. Some of the questions we ask are not genuinely about improving. I'm not trying to cut aspersion on our members. I know myself as a member that happened. And I cannot be the only target. I know most of us, we are asked and given information by private interest. You know, therefore, we have to try to live above those influences. Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry, members. I will give this time to Transnet to respond. I know for a fact that with the time that we have, you might not be able to respond to all the questions. But Honorable Kashalia raised a very important point that he will write some of the questions directly to your office, CO, and you will do the same. I think others who have those list of long questions might do the same. Because of time constraint, we all have to be at those who are based in Cape Town, like myself, we have to be in Parliament at 3 o'clock. Thank you, Transnet. Let me give you, CO, an opportunity.
Okay. Before they respond.
Okay.
Yes, Chair. I'm asking, in the interest of time and in the interest of justice, is the time that we are left with going to do justice to Transnet to respond to our questions? So we need to make a decision as to whether they are responding or how is it going to be, because they cannot just respond for the sake of responding given the time constraints. I'm just asking.
That's why I was saying that, Honorable Komani, that let's give them an opportunity to ask those questions that they can now. But members must also forward their questions. It's either to Mr. Tisang Mochumi, the Secretary of this portfolio committee, so that he can be able to send to them. But at the same time, if we won't be able to answer, we'll determine together with Mr. Mochumi whether we can recall back Transnet to engage as we normally do, perhaps early next year, because we are closing end of this week. I think we agree on that, the honorable members. Okay. Ms. Debbie.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, Chair, I just missed, so until 1:30 is what you're giving us. Honorable Chair.
I'm sorry, my gadget is giving me. No, continue, CEO. When I see the time, I will just limit you to 10 minutes or 5, warn you so that you prepare yourself to go ahead or you stop and just continue until they left with 10 minutes, give you 10 minutes, something like that.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Chair, may I just intervene here and perhaps say, would it not be more sensible, given the importance of all the questions raised by all the members with regard to the presentation, and given that we don't have I mean, really much time between now and the sitting, and people have to get from A to B, that everybody sends their questions through to Transnet. These are either answered in writing or a mixture of writing and a recalling of Transnet in the new year to deal with these, because otherwise we're going to get very short shift replies. I mean, really, how much? It's now 18 minutes past 1. How long are we going to sit here for? If we have another hour, hallelujah. But if we don't, I don't think it's possible. But that's just my suggestion, sir.
Yeah, I don't think we do have another hour. Yeah, you raise a very important point, Honorable Kachali. Can I get a second to Honorable Kachalia's question? Perhaps we come next year, we prioritize our first interaction is with Transnet to take this process forward, including responding to those questions that the members will be sent right. So that we just, when we get to that meeting on the first week, when we open, the first thing, they answer all those questions. And if we've got follow-up, go for follow-up. Can we agree to that?
I second, Chair.
The second, Honorable Command.
Agreed, Chair.
Chairperson, if I may speak on that point, I agree that questions be written and be sent, but I liked the idea that the secretary of the committee be the one who aggregates those questions and send them as a composite document to Transnet, so that you don't have a situation, Chairperson, where some members say they send their questions, they got lost on the way, or they're not responded to. But if it comes through the secretary of the committee, we know it's a composite document and we will all get it. So I would do that. At some point, I would like us to return to this issue of cadre because I think there's been a bit of confusion as to what a cadre is. It's associated with the ANC. I know the chairperson has responded to it, but maybe we'll deal with it in the written response as well.
Yeah, it's part of the entire package. Let's agree. We will be, members must send it directly to, but also Mr. Mutu will collect the amount of the questions that will be, some members will be sent both sides. It doesn't matter. We can use both. Either we send it through the office of the CEO, but all those, send another copy to Machunsa, have a collection of all those questions packaged to be responded to on that meeting. I think the proposal seconded by Honorable Komani, and there is no objection to the.
Hey.
Lamini?
Chair, as we agree to the proposal, let us also make a note that the questions we asked in our oversight visit to Cape Town have not been responded to. Maybe we can then agree that this is the second set of questions.
Okay. Our honorable, Mr. Debbie, CEO, be having another hour of responding to all this, including the question we raised on our oversight that we're supposed to reach office. I hope you will have to get all that. If you can interact with Mr. Mitumi, the secretary of this portfolio committee, to get all that particular information at the package, so that when we meet, you respond to them as a whole, together with the chairperson of the board. And also the minister, of course, we hope that he will be there by the time. We're together.
Honorable Chair, can just if I may, I support. I'm comfortable. We will deal with all of the questions from the previous time and from this session, and we will answer all of them. So let me start with an own goal. It is an own goal that we put out a document that wrote cadre. We shouldn't have. So we should have picked it up in the editing, because we know that it's a politically loaded word and creates all kinds of problems. So that's an own goal on our side. we'll definitely make sure that it doesn't happen. But Chair, I also just thought, and when we happily come back, and in fact, if I may seek your indulgence, it would be much better if we came back in person. We'll submit the answers in writing, and maybe if we had an hour or so to also provide additional detail going into next year, because even next year there'll be other issues. But I just want members to note, right, a profit on paper of 2.9 billion Rand is not cash in the bank. So let me come back to what happened last year. And really that's important because there's always a presumption. And really, I mean no insult to anyone, but our literacy and understanding of financials, the presumption every time when you write, I made a profit of 2.9 billion, is that you're going to go to your bank balance and check and see 2.9 billion. It's never a truth. That's an accounting profit. What we're increasingly insisting in Transnet is that we want to count the cash. So when it comes to the cash, I just want to give you a sense, Chair, of the situation. When TFR asked in the previous financial year, in the one in question, they requested 2.9.
CEO.
Yeah, sir. Are you keeping me quiet?
Yeah, I'm trying to stop you.
You're trying to
stop you. Because my understanding is that we're stopping the meeting now. We are attending.
Yes, exactly. No, I thought I still had until 1:30. But if we're stopping it, go fine.
I appreciate the energy. I appreciate the energy to continue engaging with, but we have agreed that we're meeting now in order for us to prepare to go to Parliament, and then we will come back early next year with all the questions packaged to your office so that you, when you come back, you do those in writing, including having to respond to them verbally, to all of them, expired need of further explanation and so on. And then from there, then the meeting continues. Then we'll be giving you another hour to respond, or more, to respond to all those questions. We know for a fact that life is not stopping. There might be other developments that will add on top of that. We're mindful of that reality.
All right, okay, I stand down.
Thank you. Honorable members, let me take this opportunity to ask the DG if you would like, before I adjourn, we've got the boss there of the Department of Public Enterprise, on to behave as if he's not here. Do you have one short thing to say before I close, DG?
Chair, the DG had to leave the meeting. The DG had to leave the meeting to join cabinet. I think there's a chief director here.
Okay. No. It's not here. It's fine. Let us thank everybody who have participated in this session today, particularly Transnet board led by Dr. Popo Molefe. We appreciated your presence and your contribution to this meeting, sir. We also thank the CEO and her team. We also thank the department, which was led by the DG. We accept his apology, and we thank you members and the staff of this portfolio committee for all your contribution and your presence to this meeting. And this meeting is adjourned now. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Chair.
Recording stopped.
Thank you. Bye-bye.